Hi guys, tonight we're following one of the most unusual journeys in medieval history. A crusade remembered not for its great battles, but for the astonishing peace it briefly achieved. You can almost hear the slow creak of wooden ships rocking against their moorings while cool evening air carries the smell of salt, damp rope, and weathered timber across the harbor. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon lies a land that generations have crossed seas to reach with swords raised high. Yet, this time, something feels different. The man preparing to sail is feared by some, admired by others, and distrusted by many. His greatest weapon may not be his army at all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you settle in, I would love to know where you are listening from and what your local time is. It is always wonderful to see people from around the world sharing these quiet evenings together. Now, dim the lights. For a moment, it feels as though you are standing beside a busy harbor in southern Italy during the early 13th century. Lanterns sway gently above wooden docks. Horses stamp their hooves against rough planks. Sailors tighten ropes that have already survived countless storms. Merchants argue over barrels of grain, while priests quietly bless travelers who may never return home. The world surrounding you has already witnessed generations of crusades. Some ended in astonishing victories. Others collapsed into disaster. Thousands of lives have disappeared beneath desert suns, winter rains, and unfamiliar skies. Entire families have spent decades remembering fathers, brothers, and sons who sailed east without ever seeing home again. Yet this journey begins with uncertainty rather than excitement. Its leader is Emperor Frederick II, ruler of a vast collection of lands stretching across much of Central Europe and southern Italy, even before his ships leave harbor. Controversy follows every step he takes. He has promised for years that he will lead a crusade. But delays, illness, political struggles, and constant disputes have repeatedly postponed his departure. Many people have stopped believing he will ever go. You can almost feel their skepticism in whispered conversations echoing beneath stone archways. Some nobles laugh quietly behind closed doors. Others wonder whether another excuse will soon appear. Even loyal followers cannot completely silence their doubts. The emperor himself remains difficult to understand. He enjoys learning as much as ruling. He surrounds himself with scholars, physicians, astronomers, translators, and administrators. His court gathers knowledge from many traditions, making it one of the most intellectually vibrant places in medieval Europe. Modern historians frequently describe him as unusually curious for his age, and research discussed by scholars at the University of Oxford has emphasized the remarkable diversity of learning that flourished under his patronage, rather than separating politics from knowledge. Frederick often treated both as essential tools of power. That curiosity shapes how you see him, instead of imagining only a warrior wearing polished armor. You begin seeing a ruler studying maps by candlelight, questioning advisors late into the evening, and weighing possibilities that others dismiss. The soft scent of melting wax fills the room while parchment rustles beneath careful hands. Outside, guards patrol silent corridors without knowing which decision may shape history before sunrise. Not everyone admires this thoughtful approach. Many church leaders expect a crusading emperor to embody straightforward devotion and unquestioned obedience. Frederick rarely fits that image. His independence repeatedly creates friction with the papacy, whose leaders believe promises made before God must never be delayed. Eventually, patience disappears. When Frederick postpones his expedition again after falling ill during an earlier attempt to sail, Pope Gregory IX responds with one of the most dramatic punishments available. The emperor is formally excommunicated from the church. The announcement echoes across Europe with astonishing speed. Imagine hearing church bells ring through crowded towns while travelers carry startling news from one marketplace to another. Some people gasp in disbelief. Others nod as though expecting nothing less. Political enemies celebrate quietly. Loyal supporters insist the punishment is unfair. Historians generally agree that Frederick had genuinely suffered illness during the abandoned voyage. Although debate continues over whether political mistrust made reconciliation impossible. Some researchers associated with the University of Cambridge have noted that both religious principle and political rivalry influenced the escalating conflict, making it difficult to separate sincere conviction from strategic calculation. That uncertainty follows you like a long shadow. You realize medieval Europe is rarely divided into simple heroes and villains. Powerful rulers defend their authority. Popes defend theirs. Both believe they protect the proper order of the Christian world. Between them stand countless ordinary people whose lives depend upon decisions made far above their reach. A stable boy brushes down exhausted horses before dawn, wondering whether his older brother will return from the coming expedition. A mother quietly mends a wool cloak that must survive unfamiliar winters and scorching summers alike. A blacksmith wipes sweat from his brow while repairing helmets destined for men whose names he will never know. These quiet moments rarely appear in grand chronicles, yet they are part of every crusade. Morning arrives beneath gray skies. Seabirds circle overhead while waves slap rhythmically against harbor walls. The smell of wet leather mixes with smoke drifting from breakfast fires. Soldiers adjust belts, sharpen blades, and inspect supplies with practiced movements. Few conversations are loud. Most understand the risks too well. Despite excommunication, Frederick refuses to abandon his vow. That choice surprises many contemporaries. Rather than surrendering to political pressure, he decides to sail anyway. It is a remarkable gamble. Some question whether a crusade led by an excommunicated emperor can possibly succeed. Others fear divine punishment itself may follow the fleet across the sea. You notice something curious. The usual confidence expected before a military campaign seems strangely absent. Instead of eager celebration, thoughtful silence settles over the docks. Even experienced knights glance toward distant horizons with expressions that reveal uncertainty rather than triumph. Perhaps they sense this journey will be unlike every crusade before it. Perhaps history itself is preparing to change direction, as ropes are finally loosened and sails begin catching the steady Mediterranean wind. You watch the shoreline slowly fade into mist. Behind you remain familiar castles, political arguments, and unfinished disputes. Ahead lies an Eastern world transformed by its own rivalries, where opportunities may emerge not through overwhelming force, but through careful conversation. You cannot know it yet. Neither can anyone standing beside you. The crusade about to unfold will challenge long-held assumptions about leadership, faith, diplomacy, and power. It will leave historians debating its meaning for centuries, while reminding every generation that history sometimes turns upon words spoken across a table instead of swords crossed upon a battlefield. Your ship rises and falls with the slow rhythm of the sea, while the familiar shoreline disappears into a pale morning haze. Behind you remain arguments that have divided kingdoms. Ahead lies uncertainty. The sails stretch tight beneath a steady wind. And every creaking timber reminds you that this crusade has already become unlike any that came before. The emperor's greatest obstacle is no longer the Mediterranean. It is Europe itself, even as the fleet advances eastward. Letters continue crossing mountains and rivers faster than many armies ever could. Messengers ride through rain, changing horses at monasteries and castles, carrying reports that shape opinions long before anyone reaches the Holy Land. One letter praises Frederick's determination, Another condemns his decision to sail while still under excommunication. The same event produces entirely different stories depending on who tells it. You begin to understand that medieval politics rarely moves in straight lines. Power spreads through conversations as much as through battlefields. Inside the emperor's flagship, the atmosphere feels surprisingly disciplined. Maps cover heavy wooden tables secured against the ship's constant movement. Wax drips slowly from candles despite the careful shielding around each flame. Experienced advisors speak quietly rather than dramatically, weighing every possibility before offering their recommendations. Frederick listens more than he speaks. That habit surprises some visiting nobles. Many rulers prefer commanding every discussion. Yet Frederick often allows arguments to unfold before reaching a conclusion. Modern historians have frequently noted this deliberate style of leadership. Research discussed by scholars at Harvard University has emphasized that Frederick relied heavily upon administration, written communication, and careful planning throughout his reign, qualities that distinguished him from many contemporaries. Of course, historians still debate exactly how much this reflected personal temperament and how much resulted from political necessity. No complete agreement survives, because the surviving records reveal both genuine intellectual curiosity and calculated statecraft, like many remarkable rulers. Frederick remains difficult to fit into simple categories. As days pass, life aboard the fleet settles into a predictable rhythm. Sunrise begins with prayers, equipment inspections, and simple meals. Salted meat appears often, although nobody greets it with much enthusiasm. Hard bread demands patience from tired jaws. Fresh water is carefully rationed, becoming more precious with each passing day. Sailors repair ropes worn rough by constant tension, while soldiers polish helmets already carrying tiny patches of rust from the salty air. The sea never truly becomes silent, even during calm weather. Water whispers against the hull. Wind hums through stretched rigging. Wooden beams answer each wave with low groans that almost resemble breathing. At night, those sounds become strangely comforting, encouraging even anxious travelers toward uneasy sleep. Not everyone aboard dreams peacefully. Some knights wonder whether fighting under an excommunicated emperor places their souls in danger. Others argue that fulfilling a sacred vow matters more than political punishment. Priests accompanying the expedition quietly offer guidance. Although certainty proves difficult when the highest authorities disagree, those conversations continue long after darkness settles across the sea. You imagine small groups gathered beneath dim lantern light, wrapped in damp wool cloaks against the evening breeze. Faces glow softly in flickering light, while careful voices avoid becoming arguments. No one wishes division to grow stronger before reaching unfamiliar shores. Frederick understands those concerns. He cannot erase the sentence pronounced against him, but neither can he ignore the responsibility he accepted years earlier. His reputation, his authority, and perhaps even the stability of his empire now travel aboard these same ships. Failure would strengthen every rival waiting back home. Success might not silence them. That realization hangs over the expedition like distant storm clouds resting beyond the horizon. Meanwhile, events in the eastern Mediterranean unfold independently of the crusading fleet. The political landscape awaiting Frederick differs greatly from the one earlier Crusaders encountered. Alliances shift with remarkable speed. Regional rulers balance military strength against fragile diplomacy, each trying to preserve influence without exhausting precious resources. The Crusaders know only fragments of this changing situation. Rumors arrive through merchants, pilgrims, and sailors whose stories rarely agree completely. One traveler insists the Eastern kingdoms stand on the edge of collapse. Another describes cautious stability. A third claims powerful leaders are more interested in negotiations than open war. Truth lies somewhere among them. History often works that way. The farther information travels, the more easily certainty fades. One evening, heavy clouds gather overhead, hiding the stars that usually guide experienced navigators. Rain begins gently before growing steady enough to blur the horizon completely. Water drums across wooden decks while sailors move with practiced confidence, tightening sails and securing loose cargo before stronger winds arrive. The smell of soaked canvas fills the air. Cold droplets gather along your sleeves. Wet leather grows heavier with every passing minute. Despite the discomfort, there is something strangely peaceful about watching experienced crews work together without panic. Every sailor understands his task. Every movement reflects years spent respecting the unpredictable sea. By dawn, the storm has passed. The sky clears gradually, revealing calm blue water stretching toward every horizon. Gulls return. Sunlight sparkles across gentle waves as though the previous night's rain had never existed. Moments like these encourage quiet reflection. You realize the Sixth Crusade has already challenged expectations before reaching its destination. Instead of charging recklessly toward battle, its leader advances with patience, calculation, and an unusual willingness to consider alternatives. Whether those alternatives succeed remains uncertain. For now, the fleet continues east. Each mile carries Frederick closer to the greatest test of his reign, where swords may matter less than words, and where centuries of conflict could briefly pause beneath the careful weight of diplomacy. The calm sea does not erase the tension carried aboard every vessel. It merely hides it beneath gentle waves. Your attention drifts toward the Emperor himself. He spends long periods speaking with trusted advisors instead of drilling soldiers for immediate combat. Messengers arrive in small boats whenever the fleet pauses near friendly ports. Every sealed letter receives careful attention before another reply disappears across the water. Words travel almost as often as ships. That detail feels unusual for a crusade. Many earlier expeditions measured progress by captured fortresses and victorious battles. Frederick appears equally interested in information. He wants reliable reports about the rulers waiting beyond the eastern horizon. Which alliances remain strong, which families quarrel over succession, which governors seek stability more than glory. Knowledge, he believes, can spare lives. The emperor's reputation as a learned ruler continues to shape every decision. Contemporary observers frequently remarked upon his fascination with languages, administration, and natural science. Modern scholarship discussed by researchers at Yale University has likewise highlighted how Frederick governed through careful organization as much as personal authority. He understood that successful leadership required patience before action. Still, no amount of planning removes uncertainty. Historians continue debating whether Frederick always intended diplomacy to become his primary strategy, or whether changing political circumstances gradually pushed him in that direction. Surviving records allow several reasonable interpretations, reminding you that even famous rulers rarely leave behind perfectly clear intentions. The fleet sails onward beneath bright skies. Sea wind dries the rain left from the previous storm. Salt crystals gather upon ropes and wooden rails. Sailors laugh quietly while repairing torn canvas, grateful for calmer weather. A young page carefully oils a knight's helmet until its dull surface catches the afternoon sunlight. Life settles into routine. Routine comforts people. Each familiar task keeps anxious thoughts from wandering too far ahead. Meals remain simple. Bowls of thick soup steam gently during cooler evenings. Hard bread softens only after patient dipping. Dried fish appears often enough that few celebrate its arrival. Yet, nobody complains loudly. Hunger teaches gratitude. Nearby, a veteran knight carefully sharpens his sword despite growing rumors that it may never leave its scabbard. Steel still deserves respect, whether drawn or not. That quiet habit reflects generations of military tradition. As another sunset colors the western sky, conversation shifts toward the Holy Land itself. Younger soldiers ask older veterans about cities they have never seen. Stories flow easily across the deck. They hear of towering walls glowing beneath morning sunlight. They hear of narrow streets crowded with pilgrims. They hear of churches, markets, gardens, and wells that have survived countless rulers. Most of all, they hear about Jerusalem. The city has become more than a destination. It has become an idea carried across generations. Many aboard the fleet have spent their entire lives listening to sermons describing its sacred importance. Some imagine magnificent beauty. Others imagine endless conflict. Few truly know what awaits. The emperor listens occasionally, but rarely interrupts. His thoughts seem occupied elsewhere. Perhaps he already understands that capturing a city means little if peace cannot survive afterward. Night falls once again. Stars gradually emerge above the quiet sea. Without the smoke of crowded towns, the heavens appear astonishingly clear. Sailors identify familiar constellations, while navigators confirm the fleet remains on course. Gentle waves reflect scattered points of light until sea and sky almost seem to merge into one endless darkness. Silence settles naturally, not complete silence, only the peaceful kind, a distant cough, the creak of timber, the steady breathing of sleeping men. These ordinary sounds remind you that history is built not only by famous leaders, but also by countless unnamed people sharing ordinary moments between extraordinary events. A cook quietly prepares tomorrow's breakfast before dawn arrives. A stable hand checks nervous horses secured below deck. A young squire folds his blanket carefully because his father taught him never to waste effort. Small habits survive, even during Crusades. Several mornings later, distant land finally appears. At first, it resembles nothing more than a faint gray line separating sea from sky. Gradually, hills emerge. Then scattered buildings, finally. Busy harbors filled with ships from many different lands. Excitement spreads through the fleet. Some sailors cheer. Others simply smile with quiet relief. After weeks surrounded by open water, even the smell of dry earth carried across the breeze feels strangely comforting. Sea salt mixes with distant wood smoke drifting from the coast. Birds circle overhead in greater numbers, announcing that land truly lies ahead. Yet the eastern Mediterranean greeting the Crusaders is far from peaceful. Political rivalries have already reshaped the balance of power. Regional leaders watch one another carefully. Alliances formed only a few years earlier have weakened. Ambitious governors seek influence while attempting to avoid exhausting wars. Every decision depends upon fragile calculations. Frederick's advisors study these developments with intense interest. They recognize opportunity where others might see confusion. A divided political landscape can become dangerous. It can also become negotiable. The emperor understands that every rival worried about internal stability has one less reason to welcome another costly war. If both sides seek breathing room, perhaps conversation can achieve what armies never managed. That possibility remains uncertain. No one aboard the fleet mistakes hope for certainty. One reckless decision could still destroy everything. As anchors finally splash into sheltered waters, soldiers prepare to step onto unfamiliar ground. Leather boots touch weathered docks. Horses snort impatiently after weeks confined aboard ships. Crates filled with supplies are lowered carefully into waiting boats, while local merchants observe the newcomers with cautious curiosity. The air feels warmer here, different somehow. Spices carried through nearby markets mingle with the scent of fresh bread baking inside stone ovens. Palm trees sway gently beyond fortified walls. Children pause their games to watch heavily armed strangers unload equipment that may never be used. You take one slow breath. The real test begins now. The sea journey has ended, but the greater voyage, one shaped by diplomacy, faith, ambition, and extraordinary restraint, is only beginning. Morning sunlight spreads across the harbor in slow golden bands, warming stone walls that have watched generations of travelers arrive with very different ambitions. Some came seeking profit. Others searched for forgiveness. Many arrived carrying sharpened swords. You step onto solid ground with stiff legs after weeks at sea, noticing how still the earth feels beneath your boots. The air is different here. Sea wind still carries the familiar taste of salt. But now another layer joins it. Warm bread drifts from nearby ovens. Olive wood burns gently inside cooking fires, somewhere deeper within the town. A blacksmith strikes glowing iron with steady rhythm, each hammer blow echoing between narrow streets. Life continues. That realization feels surprisingly comforting. The people living here cannot pause their daily routines simply because another crusade has arrived. Fishermen mend torn nets beside the harbor. Children chase one another through dusty courtyards. Merchants arrange baskets of fruit beneath woven awnings before bargaining begins. History often focuses on kings. Daily life rarely does. Yet these ordinary moments remind you what every great political decision ultimately protects or destroys. Frederick wastes little time after landing. Instead of immediately organizing large military demonstrations, he calls trusted advisors together inside a modest stone residence overlooking the harbor. Maps soon cover a broad wooden table. Small stones mark important cities. Thin lines drawn in dark ink trace roads crossing hills, rivers, and deserts. No voices are raised. There is urgency, but not panic. The Emperor understands something many commanders forget. Information gathered before marching may save far more lives than courage displayed afterward. Modern historians have frequently emphasized that the Sixth Crusade differed sharply from many earlier expeditions because diplomacy occupied such a central role. Research discussed by scholars at Stanford University has highlighted how political circumstances in both Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean created opportunities that would have been impossible only a generation earlier. Still, historians continue debating whether Frederick recognized those opportunities from the beginning or gradually adapted as new reports reached his headquarters. Contemporary evidence leaves room for thoughtful disagreement, encouraging careful interpretation rather than absolute certainty. Outside the meeting hall, soldiers establish a disciplined camp. Canvas shelters rise steadily beneath experienced hands. Pack animals finally stretch cramped legs after the long voyage. Armor is inspected for hidden damage caused by sea air. Every routine reflects quiet professionalism rather than excitement. You notice the absence of celebration. There are no triumphant speeches promising swift victory. No commanders boast that the campaign will end within weeks. Instead, patience settles over the camp like the gentle afternoon warmth. A veteran knight sits on an overturned barrel while carefully stitching a torn glove. His fingers move slowly, almost absent-mindedly, across from him. A younger soldier cleans mud from his boots, although they have barely left the harbor. Small tasks calm restless minds. Nearby, cooks prepare a thick vegetable stew inside black iron pots. Steam rises into the warm afternoon while hungry men gather with wooden bowls. The meal is simple but welcome. After weeks of salted provisions aboard ship, fresh vegetables feel almost luxurious. One soldier quietly laughs after tasting an onion. It is sweeter than expected. The laughter spreads, not loudly, just enough to remind everyone that ordinary happiness survives even during uncertain times. Meanwhile, Frederick's messengers begin traveling in several directions. Some ride toward nearby Christian settlements. Others seek contact with regional officials whose loyalties remain uncertain. Every conversation matters. Every rumor deserves examination before becoming policy. The Emperor understands that the political landscape surrounding Jerusalem has changed dramatically. The great ruler controlling much of the region now faces serious challenges closer to home. Family rivalries, competing claims, and regional disputes demand constant attention. Maintaining unity has become increasingly difficult. That reality changes everything. A leader facing internal difficulties may value stability more than prolonged warfare. Frederick recognizes the possibility immediately. Instead of searching first for weak fortress walls, he searches for willing listeners. As evening approaches, the harbor grows quieter. Merchant ships secure heavy ropes before darkness falls. Seabirds settle along weathered piers. The last marketplace conversations drift into silence, while lanterns begin glowing behind narrow windows. Your thoughts slow with the fading light. You begin appreciating how unusual this expedition already feels. Previous crusades often advanced through dramatic military movements that filled chronicles with sieges and cavalry charges. Here, progress measures itself through patient discussions, careful observation, and disciplined restraint. That does not mean danger has disappeared. Quite the opposite. Scouts continue reporting troop movements beyond the horizon. Fortified positions remain alert. Suspicion survives on every side because decades of conflict cannot disappear overnight. Trust grows slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. Inside Frederick's headquarters, another meeting continues well after sunset. Candles burn lower while scribes copy letters onto clean sheets of parchment. Each message is written with extraordinary care, because careless language may undo months of preparation. The scratching of quills becomes the room's steady heartbeat. Wax seals cool gradually. Fresh messengers prepare their horses before first light. The Emperor reviews every document one final time. You sense his awareness that this campaign may depend upon individual sentences as much as military formations. Outside, the night air turns pleasantly cool. A light breeze carries the scent of flowering shrubs from nearby gardens. Somewhere beyond the walls, sheep bells ring softly as shepherds gather their flocks. The peaceful sounds almost make it difficult to believe that two civilizations have struggled over these lands for generations. For a brief moment, everything feels balanced. Fragile, but balanced. Tomorrow, the first meaningful exchanges with powerful Eastern rulers may begin. No one knows whether they will end with agreement or renewed hostility. Every possibility remains open. You lie beneath a canvas roof, listening to distant waves meeting the shore. The steady rhythm blends with quiet conversations fading across the camp. Sleep arrives slowly, carrying with it a simple realization. Sometimes, the most important battles begin with two people choosing to listen before they choose to fight. Dawn arrives without fanfare. A pale band of light slowly lifts above the eastern horizon while the camp stirs awake one quiet sound at a time. A cook places another bundle of firewood beneath an iron pot. A groom brushes dust from a patient horse. Leather straps creak as soldiers tighten equipment that may never see battle. The morning feels almost ordinary. That is precisely what makes it remarkable. You expected the opening days of a crusade to thunder with marching feet and shouted commands. Instead, you find yourself surrounded by measured voices, careful planning, and long stretches of waiting. The silence carries its own weight. Frederick seems comfortable within it. He rises early, receiving reports before the camp fully awakens. Couriers arrive carrying information gathered during the night. Some describe movements along distant roads. Others report conversations held in nearby towns. None of the messages is dismissed as unimportant. Every detail contributes to the larger picture. The Emperor knows that successful diplomacy begins with understanding the concerns of the other side. Outside his headquarters, the camp continues growing into a small temporary town. Tents stand in neat rows. Blacksmiths repair loose horseshoes while carpenters strengthen wagon wheels weakened by the sea voyage. Merchants follow every army, and this expedition proves no different. They quietly unpack cloth, cooking tools, candles, and spare boots. Knowing soldiers always need supplies, life finds its rhythm quickly. Children from neighboring settlements cautiously approach the edge of the camp, curious about the newcomers. They watch knights polishing helmets that gleam beneath the morning sun. Some laugh quietly after seeing enormous war horses shake their heavy manes. Their parents remain more cautious, observing from a respectful distance. Years of conflict have taught careful habits. Trust does not appear overnight, yet curiosity survives, even where fear has lingered. Frederick encourages discipline among his followers. He understands that careless behavior could destroy fragile goodwill before negotiations even begin. Guards receive clear instructions. Supplies are carefully accounted for. Local property is respected whenever possible. Modern historians have often observed that maintaining order within a crusading army required constant attention. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Chicago has emphasized that discipline frequently determined whether medieval expeditions gained local cooperation or provoked unnecessary resistance. Military success depended upon conduct as much as courage. Even so, historians still debate how consistently these standards were followed in practice. Contemporary accounts naturally present different perspectives, reminding you that medieval chroniclers often wrote with their own loyalties and expectations. The sun climbs higher. Warm air settles across the countryside, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant orchards. Olive trees shimmer gently beneath the afternoon breeze. Dust rises beneath passing horses before settling once more upon the winding roads. Scouts ride those roads every day. They travel lightly, speaking with merchants, pilgrims, and village elders whenever opportunities arise. Information flows through ordinary people as reliably as through nobles. A trader who visits 3 markets each week often knows more about changing conditions than a distant governor. One experienced scout returns carrying encouraging news. Several regional officials appear willing to exchange messages rather than threats. That possibility changes the atmosphere inside the camp. Not dramatically. Hope grows carefully. The emperor immediately orders fresh letters prepared. Scribes smooth clean parchment across wooden tables. Ink is mixed with practiced hands. Every sentence receives thoughtful attention because words once delivered cannot easily be recalled. You watch one elderly scribe pause before writing a single line. He whispers it quietly to himself. Then he begins again. Even the smallest phrase matters. Diplomacy often depends upon respect expressed through careful language. As evening approaches, Frederick walks beyond the busiest part of the camp, accompanied by only a handful of trusted companions. He studies the surrounding hills in thoughtful silence. Birds circle lazily overhead while shepherds guide flocks toward sheltered valleys before darkness falls. The landscape appears peaceful, beautiful even, yet every ridge has witnessed armies passing through during earlier generations. Every ruined watchtower tells a story of conflict now fading into memory. Nature has patiently covered old scars with grass and wildflowers. Although history still remembers what happened there, the emperor seems aware of that contrast. He has read enough history to understand how easily victory can disappear. Cities change hands. Alliances collapse. Celebrated triumphs become forgotten chapters within only a few lifetimes. Lasting peace proves far more difficult. That realization quietly shapes his decisions. After sunset, cooler air settles across the camp. Lanterns flicker outside tents, while distant voices soften into murmurs. Supper consists of thick lentil stew, coarse bread, and a small portion of goat cheese. Nobody complains. Simple meals nourish tired bodies. Shared meals strengthen weary spirits. Nearby, 2 older knights exchange stories about earlier crusades. Their voices remain calm rather than boastful. They remember difficult marches beneath relentless heat, uncertain commanders, and companions who never returned home. One man admits that he never expected to join another expedition, yet here he is, older now, perhaps wiser, listening to their conversation. You notice something changing within yourself. At first, this journey seemed destined to become another familiar tale of armies seeking decisive battle. Instead, every passing day reveals a different path. Patience has become the campaign's greatest weapon. Some soldiers struggle to understand it. Others quietly welcome it. No one can predict whether negotiation will succeed. Too many ambitions, fears, and misunderstandings remain unresolved. A single mistake could still push both sides toward violence. For now, however, another letter leaves Frederick's headquarters beneath the cover of night. A trusted envoy carries it toward a ruler whose own kingdom faces growing uncertainty. If the message reaches willing hands, history may soon begin turning in an unexpected direction. You settle beneath your blanket as a cool breeze stirs the canvas overhead. Somewhere beyond the sleeping camp, an owl calls across the dark countryside. The sound lingers for a moment before fading into peaceful silence. Tomorrow may bring answers, or more questions. Either way, the road ahead is no longer guided only by the sword. Morning arrives, wrapped in a thin layer of mist that softens the distant hills into gentle shades of gray. The first rays of sunlight gradually dissolve the haze, revealing roads that twist through olive groves and small farming villages. Dew clings to wild grasses before disappearing beneath the growing warmth of the day. Your thoughts drift beyond the camp. Somewhere ahead, powerful rulers are making calculations remarkably similar to Frederick's own. They study reports from their advisors. They measure risks against opportunities. They wonder whether another costly war can truly benefit anyone. The Eastern Mediterranean is no longer defined by one clear struggle between two united worlds. Instead, it has become a landscape of shifting loyalties. That complexity surprises many Western observers. Generations of sermons had often presented the region as a simple contest between opposing faiths. Yet, the reality proves far more intricate. Noble families compete with one another. Governors guard their own authority. Regional leaders negotiate alliances that may change within months rather than decades. Understanding those divisions becomes Frederick's greatest advantage, rather than rushing toward confrontation. He patiently studies the political balance surrounding Jerusalem and the neighboring territories. Every messenger returning to camp brings another small piece of a complicated puzzle. No report is complete. Together, they begin revealing a pattern. The ruler controlling much of the region faces growing pressure from within his own family. Relatives compete for influence. Local commanders weigh personal ambition against loyalty. Every decision must account not only for foreign armies, but also for internal stability. A prolonged war could weaken everyone. That possibility quietly reshapes the entire campaign. Modern historians have frequently emphasized that these internal political divisions created unusual diplomatic opportunities during the Sixth Crusade. Research discussed by scholars at Princeton University has noted that the changing balance of power within the Eastern leadership significantly influenced later negotiations, making compromise more attractive than another exhausting conflict. Even so, historians still debate exactly how decisive those internal disputes became. Some argue they formed the essential reason diplomacy succeeded, while others believe Frederick's personal approach proved equally important. The surviving evidence encourages careful judgment rather than simple conclusions. Inside the Crusader camp, ordinary routines continue. Armor receives another careful polishing, despite showing little sign of use. Stable hands brush horses, whose greatest exertion so far has been carrying messengers instead of charging across battlefields. Cooks prepare barley porridge, while smoke rises lazily into the cool morning air. The smell reminds you of home. Simple food often does. Nearby, an elderly pilgrim quietly repairs a worn leather sandal with thick linen thread. His hands move slowly, shaped by decades of work rather than warfare. He has not crossed the sea seeking glory. He hopes only to pray peacefully in the holy places he has imagined since childhood. His journey matters too. History often remembers rulers. Pilgrims remember hope. Merchants remember opportunity. Families remember absence. All travel together beneath the larger story. As the afternoon unfolds, Frederick receives another delegation from neighboring Christian settlements. Their concerns differ from those voiced in Europe. These communities have lived beside Muslim neighbors for generations. They understand that peace, however imperfect, often allows trade, farming, and ordinary life to continue. Several local leaders quietly encourage caution. Another destructive campaign would burden everyone. Fields cannot produce grain while armies march across them. Markets cannot flourish if roads become unsafe. Pilgrims cannot travel freely through regions consumed by endless conflict. These practical realities influence every conversation. The emperor listens carefully. He asks detailed questions about local conditions, harvests, roads, and fortifications. His interest extends beyond military matters into the daily lives of those already living here. One advisor later remarks that lasting agreements cannot ignore ordinary people. Frederick silently nods. The observation seems obvious, yet history repeatedly proves how often powerful leaders forget it. As evening approaches, the camp receives unexpected visitors. They are not armed envoys demanding surrender or issuing threats. Instead, they arrive carrying polite greetings and requests for further communication. The atmosphere changes immediately. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Conversations become quieter. Officers exchange thoughtful glances. Scribes begin preparing fresh parchment before anyone even asks. Hope remains cautious, but it is undeniably present. The first careful bridge has been built. Only words. Still, words matter. You watch one messenger remove dust from his boots before entering the emperor's tent. The gesture seems almost ceremonial. Respect begins with small actions, a courteous greeting, a patient pause before speaking, an acknowledgement that both sides have suffered enough from decades of conflict. Night settles gently across the countryside. Lanterns glow warmly between rows of tents. Crickets sing beneath nearby shrubs, while a soft breeze carries the scent of wood smoke through the camp. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, shepherds guide their final sheep into sheltered pens before darkness fully arrives. The emperor remains awake. Letters lie open before him. Some contain cautious optimism. Others warn against trusting promises too quickly. He reads every one. Leadership often means accepting that certainty rarely exists. Only probabilities, only choices, only consequences. You sit quietly outside, watching sparks drift upward from a small fire until they disappear into the star-filled sky. The peaceful scene feels almost impossible to reconcile with the generations of violence that have marked these lands. Yet perhaps that is history's greatest lesson. Even after decades of conflict, moments of calm still emerge. Whether they endure depends entirely upon the decisions people make when tomorrow arrives, far beyond the camp. Another ruler prepares his own response. Soon, two remarkable men will begin one of the most extraordinary diplomatic exchanges of the medieval world. An exchange that may accomplish what countless armies could not. The waiting continues. For now, patience remains the strongest weapon either side possesses. The camp awakens beneath a sky washed clean by the cool air of early morning. Thin clouds drift lazily overhead while sunlight slowly reaches the tops of distant hills before spilling into the valleys below. A rooster calls from a nearby village, followed by the steady clatter of wooden wheels as farmers begin another ordinary day. Their routines continue. Harvests cannot wait for politics, neither can hungry families. You find yourself thinking less about kings and more about the people living between them. Every treaty signed by rulers eventually reaches shepherds tending flocks, merchants opening market stalls, children carrying water from village wells, and craftsmen shaping wood or stone with practiced hands. History travels downward. It begins with powerful decisions. It ends inside ordinary homes. Frederick understands this better than many of his contemporaries. His advisors spend another morning reviewing reports from travelers who have crossed roads stretching toward the interior. Some describe peaceful villages. Others mention isolated bands of armed men protecting important routes. Most agree on one important fact. The political landscape remains unsettled. That uncertainty does not belong solely to the Crusaders. Beyond the Christian camp, the ruler whose decisions matter most also faces growing pressure. Sultan Al Kamil governs a realm whose greatest danger no longer comes exclusively from foreign armies. Rival family members, competing governors, and regional ambitions demand constant attention. Power rarely rests comfortably. Even successful rulers spend much of their time preventing yesterday's allies from becoming tomorrow's rivals. Al Kamil knows another long war could weaken his position at precisely the wrong moment. Every soldier committed against the Crusaders becomes one less available to secure his own territories. Every fortress requiring supplies drains resources already stretched by internal disputes. The situation invites caution, not surrender, not weakness, simply caution. Modern historians have frequently observed that both Frederick and Al Kamil entered the Sixth Crusade, burdened by political challenges outside the immediate conflict. Research discussed by scholars at Columbia University has emphasized that each leader faced pressures encouraging negotiation rather than prolonged warfare, creating an unusual moment when diplomacy aligned with practical necessity. Even today, historians continue debating which leader benefited more from compromise. Some view the treaty primarily as Frederick's triumph. Others argue that Al Kamil gained valuable stability without risking a destructive campaign. The surviving evidence supports thoughtful arguments on both sides. As these larger calculations unfold, life inside the camp remains surprisingly peaceful. A farrier patiently replaces a worn horseshoe, while the animal stands almost motionless. Sparks leap briefly from the anvil before fading into the bright morning light. Nearby, several soldiers wash dust from their clothing in shallow basins, laughing quietly as cold water splashes across their hands. The laughter feels genuine. It has been absent for too long. One young archer sits beneath an olive tree writing a letter home. His handwriting is careful but uneven. Every few moments he pauses, staring toward the horizon as though searching for the right words. What can he write? That he has crossed the sea, that he remains healthy, that no great battle has yet begun. Perhaps that final sentence surprises even him. Elsewhere, the emperor receives another visitor. The envoy arrives without theatrical ceremony. Dust covers the hem of his cloak after many miles on horseback. He bows respectfully before presenting sealed correspondence from Al Kamil's representatives. The entire room grows still. Frederick breaks the seal carefully. No one interrupts while he reads. Only the faint crackling of candle flames disturbs the silence. The message avoids threats. It avoids impossible demands. Instead, it speaks of discussion, of mutual concerns, of possibilities. Those few measured words carry enormous significance. For the first time, both sides openly acknowledge that conversation may achieve more than open conflict. You almost sense the atmosphere changing, not because peace has arrived. It has not. But because both leaders have chosen to leave one important door unlocked. Frederick immediately consults his closest advisors. Opinions differ, as they often do when history balances upon uncertain ground. Some argue that military strength should remain the primary language of negotiation. Others insist patience now offers the greatest advantage. One experienced noble quietly reminds everyone that broken trust cannot easily be repaired. The emperor listens. He asks questions rather than delivering speeches. He requests clarification instead of immediate agreement. Leadership sometimes sounds remarkably quiet. Outside, afternoon sunlight settles warmly across the camp. The smell of fresh bread drifts from portable ovens built by experienced cooks using local stone and packed earth. A pair of children from a nearby settlement cautiously approaches with baskets of figs to sell. Business begins. Smiles follow. One soldier trades a small copper coin for several pieces of fruit, then gives half to a companion repairing torn boots nearby. It is a tiny act of kindness that no chronicler records, yet it happened. History contains thousands like it. As evening approaches, Frederick prepares his first formal reply. Every sentence receives close attention. Respect must be shown without surrendering dignity. Confidence must appear without arrogance. Hope must remain realistic. The scribes write slowly, reading each paragraph aloud before continuing. Wax seals are warmed. Fresh horses are selected for the returning envoys. Nothing is rushed. The letter finally departs beneath the soft colors of sunset. You watch the riders disappear along a winding road lined with cypress trees. Dust rises briefly behind them before settling once again upon the quiet earth. Their journey carries more than parchment. It carries possibility. Night falls gently. Stars appear one by one above the peaceful countryside, while distant sheep bells echo across darkened fields. The emperor's camp grows quieter than ever before. Men who expected to sharpen swords now find themselves sharpening patience instead. You lie awake for a few moments beneath the cool evening air, listening to insects singing beyond the tents. Tomorrow, another reply may arrive. With each exchanged letter, the distance between two opposing rulers becomes just a little smaller. The battlefield still exists, but for now, it waits. Morning arrives with a cool breeze flowing inland from the sea, carrying the familiar scent of salt mixed with the fragrance of citrus orchards waking beneath the rising sun. Dew sparkles across the grass before quietly disappearing into the warmth of another clear day. Around the camp, the sounds of ordinary work begin long before the first formal meeting. A cook stirs a pot of barley porridge. A stable hand checks saddle straps one final time. A scribe stretches cramped fingers before preparing fresh parchment. Nothing feels hurried. That calm has become one of the expedition's greatest strengths. You begin noticing how different this crusade feels from the stories carried across Europe for generations. Earlier campaigns often rushed towards dramatic confrontations, believing momentum alone could decide history. Frederick appears convinced that patience creates its own momentum. The next exchange of messages will test that belief. The returning envoys arrive shortly after sunrise. Dust coats their boots, and their horses breathe heavily after covering many miles with remarkable speed. Every eye follows them as they dismount outside the emperor's headquarters. No cheers greet them, only attentive silence. The sealed documents are presented with careful respect. Frederick studies the wax seal for a brief moment before breaking it. Around him, advisors remain perfectly still, waiting for the smallest sign upon his face. He reads slowly. Then he reads again. Finally, he places the letter gently upon the table. The reply is encouraging. It does not promise agreement. It does not guarantee peace. Instead, it suggests that direct conversation between trusted representatives may serve both rulers better than immediate military action. A quiet breath passes through the room. No one celebrates. Experienced statesmen understand that diplomacy advances through cautious steps rather than dramatic leaps. Frederick immediately begins discussing the practical details. Which advisors should participate? Where should the meeting take place? How should both sides guarantee the safety of their representatives? Questions multiply quickly because trust remains fragile. Every answer requires balance. Too much confidence appears careless. Too much suspicion destroys progress. Modern historians have frequently described these early diplomatic contacts as extraordinary within the broader history of the Crusades. Research discussed by scholars at the University of California has emphasized that both rulers demonstrated unusual political flexibility during these negotiations, recognizing opportunities that many contemporaries failed to appreciate. Even today, historians still debate whether personal respect gradually developed between Frederick and Al Kamil, or whether mutual necessity remained the stronger influence throughout the discussions. Contemporary sources offer different impressions, leaving thoughtful room for interpretation. As preparations continue, life outside the headquarters moves with comforting familiarity. Several armorers inspect helmets stacked neatly beneath a canvas shelter. Tiny patches of rust left by sea air are carefully removed before fresh oil protects the polished steel. Nearby, a carpenter repairs a wagon axle damaged during the journey inland. His hammer strikes slowly, steadily. Each measured blow echoes across the camp before fading into the open countryside. Not far away, merchants have established a small marketplace serving both soldiers and nearby villagers. Fresh bread changes hands beside woven baskets filled with figs, olives, and onions. Coins clink softly against wooden counters while buyers examine cloth, candles, and leather gloves. Business crosses boundaries more easily than armies. You watch a local baker smile after a young Crusader struggles to explain what he wishes to purchase. Neither speaks the other's language perfectly. Even so, bread changes hands. Payment is accepted, and both men leave satisfied. Simple exchanges often succeed where grand speeches fail. As afternoon approaches, the Emperor's chosen envoys depart beneath a bright blue sky. They carry no banners demanding surrender. Their escort remains deliberately modest, signaling peaceful intentions rather than military strength. The road winds gently through rolling hills dotted with olive trees, whose silver leaves shimmer beneath the sunlight. Small farms appear from time to time, their stone walls blending naturally into the landscape. Farmers pause briefly to watch the riders pass before returning to their work. The harvest cannot wait. History rarely pauses ordinary life for very long. Hours later, the meeting begins inside a carefully selected neutral location. Thick stone walls shield the participants from the afternoon heat. Cool air lingers inside the chamber despite the warmth outside. Greetings are exchanged with measured courtesy. Every movement carries meaning. Seats are offered respectfully. Water is served before serious discussion begins. No one mistakes politeness for weakness. Both sides understand that dignity must remain intact if lasting agreement is ever to emerge. The first conversations move carefully. Each delegation outlines its concerns without raising voices or issuing impossible demands. They speak about security for pilgrims, control of important cities, and the heavy burden another war would place upon their people. Outside the building, guards wait patiently beneath the shade of broad trees. Their swords remain sheathed. The quiet scene feels almost unbelievable. Generations had grown accustomed to expecting violence whenever crusading armies met the rulers of these lands. Yet here, the loudest sound comes from birds calling across nearby fields. Inside, progress remains slow. Questions receive thoughtful answers rather than hurried replies. Occasionally, long pauses settle over the room while each side reflects before continuing. Those silences matter. They allow anger to cool. They create space for understanding. As evening approaches, the meeting concludes without final agreement. Yet, neither side walks away disappointed. More conversations have been arranged. That alone represents remarkable progress. The envoys return to Frederick carrying detailed reports rather than triumphant declarations. The Emperor listens carefully as every observation is presented. He asks about tone as much as content. Did the other representatives appear sincere, which proposals received genuine interest? Where did hesitation remain strongest? His questions reveal an experienced ruler. Diplomacy depends as much upon listening as speaking. Night settles quietly across the camp. Lanterns glow like scattered stars between rows of tents, while the smell of wood smoke drifts gently through the cool evening air. Soldiers gather around small fires, sharing simple meals and quieter conversations than usual. Many sense something important is unfolding. Not everyone fully understands it, but they feel history shifting beneath their feet. You lie beneath a blanket, listening to the distant rhythm of waves carried inland by the night breeze. Somewhere beyond the darkness, another ruler studies the same day's events beneath another roof, wondering whether tomorrow might finally bring the first outlines of peace. The journey has entered a new stage. The sword remains at every warrior's side, for now. However, the future rests in the careful choice of words. The next morning begins almost quietly enough to make you forget that thousands of armed men occupy the countryside. Thin ribbons of smoke rise from breakfast fires before drifting lazily across the fields. The scent of warm bread mingles with damp earth left cool by the night. Somewhere beyond the camp, a shepherd whistles softly while guiding his flock toward fresh pasture. The ordinary world continues. It always does. Even while history prepares to change, your thoughts return to the discussions held the previous day. No fortress has fallen. No banners have been captured. No cavalry has charged across open ground. Yet, something substantial has shifted beneath the surface. Two determined rulers have accepted that another conversation is worth pursuing. That decision alone separates this crusade from nearly every expedition that came before it. Frederick spends the early hours reviewing detailed notes prepared by his advisors. Every observation receives attention. Which proposals encouraged interest? Which subjects caused hesitation? Which expressions seemed to lower suspicion rather than increase it? The emperor treats diplomacy almost like a craftsman shaping fine wood. Each careful adjustment matters. Every rough edge must be smoothed before the finished work can endure. Modern historians have often emphasized that Frederick approached negotiation with unusual patience for a medieval ruler. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Cambridge has highlighted the deliberate pace of these exchanges, suggesting that careful preparation proved as valuable as military strength. Rather than forcing immediate conclusions, Frederick consistently allowed discussions to develop over time. Even so, historians still debate whether such patience reflected confidence or necessity. Some argue he possessed too few military options to risk open conflict. Others believe his political outlook genuinely favored practical compromise whenever it served long-term stability. The surviving evidence allows thoughtful arguments in both directions. Outside the headquarters, daily life unfolds with familiar rhythm. Several soldiers gather around a cooper, repairing cracked water barrels. The steady tapping of wooden mallets echoes gently through the camp. Nearby, two young pages compete to see who can polish a helmet until it reflects the morning sun most clearly. One laughs first, the other laughs harder. For a brief moment, both forget they are participating in a crusade. Small moments like these quietly anchor the larger story. An elderly merchant arranges folded cloth upon a rough wooden table. Beside him, a woman from a nearby village exchanges fresh vegetables for iron cooking tools brought across the sea. Their conversation is slow, relying as much upon gestures as words. Yet both leave satisfied. Trade often discovers common ground long before politics does. By midday, another delegation prepares to leave Frederick's camp. This group carries revised proposals rather than demands. Every document has been copied twice in case one version is damaged during the journey. Wax seals cool carefully before being wrapped inside protective cloth. Nothing is left to chance. The riders depart beneath bright sunshine, their horses moving at a steady pace along winding roads lined with olive trees and scattered vineyards. Cicadas sing from branches warmed by the afternoon heat. Dust rises behind the small procession before slowly settling back upon the earth. The countryside appears peaceful. Its appearance hides years of uncertainty. Stone watchtowers stand upon distant ridges, reminders that these lands have spent generations preparing for conflict. Some walls show signs of repair. Others remain partially ruined, their broken stones softened by climbing vines and wild grasses. Nature heals patiently. Human memory takes longer. When the envoys arrive, they are welcomed with measured courtesy once again. Guards inspect weapons before respectfully requesting that heavy arms remain outside the meeting chamber. The gesture is practical rather than insulting. Inside, cool stone walls provide relief from the afternoon warmth. Water is served. Simple food follows. Only then do formal discussions begin. The atmosphere feels noticeably different from the first meeting. Familiar faces reduce uncertainty. Small courtesies exchanged earlier have already begun creating cautious confidence. Neither side speaks carelessly. Each representative understands that one poorly chosen sentence could undo weeks of patient effort. The conversation gradually moves beyond general principles toward practical details. Safe access for pilgrims becomes one important subject. Administration of sacred places receives equal attention. Questions concerning security, local authority, and future cooperation are examined one after another. Progress remains slow, but it is genuine. No dramatic breakthrough arrives before sunset. Instead, understanding grows one careful agreement at a time. Frederick receives updates throughout the day from riders traveling between the meeting place and his headquarters. He listens without interruption, occasionally asking for a particular phrase to be repeated exactly as it had been spoken. Words matter that much. A subtle difference in tone can transform suspicion into reassurance. As evening approaches, the Emperor walks beyond the edge of the camp. The sea breeze returns, carrying cool air across gently rolling fields. Birds settle into nearby trees, while the western sky glows with soft shades of gold and crimson. He pauses for several moments. No one disturbs him. Perhaps he is considering how unusual this entire campaign has become. He had crossed the Mediterranean expecting uncertainty. He had certainly expected opposition. Yet each passing day suggests that diplomacy may achieve what generations believed impossible. Back inside the camp, supper is shared beneath flickering lanterns. Thick vegetable stew fills wooden bowls, while coarse bread disappears quickly after another long day. Conversation remains relaxed. Rumors circulate, but they are quieter now, carrying light uttering more hope than fear. One veteran quietly remarks that he has marched through enough wars to recognize the value of delayed fighting. Another simply nods. No further explanation is needed. You settle beneath your blanket after darkness fully embraces the countryside. Crickets sing steadily beyond the tents, somewhere in the distance. A horse snorts before becoming still again. The night feels peaceful, not because danger has vanished, because possibility has appeared. Tomorrow may not bring final agreement. It may bring another careful step. Sometimes history changes exactly that way, almost silently, while most of the world sleeps. The first light of dawn slips quietly across the camp, touching rows of canvas tents before reaching the surrounding hills. Overnight, a cool breeze has carried away much of yesterday's warmth, leaving the air fresh enough that every breath feels crisp. Dew gathers along ropes stretched between wooden posts, sparkling briefly before the rising sun claims it. Another day begins. No battle horns sound. No siege engines roll into position. Instead, messengers prepare fresh horses while scribes sharpen new quills. The rhythm of diplomacy has become the rhythm of the crusade. You notice how naturally everyone has adapted. Soldiers still maintain their weapons with disciplined care, but they no longer expect to be summoned into combat before sunset. Armor is polished because discipline requires it, not because cavalry charges seem imminent. Shields lean against tent poles beside neatly stacked bundles of supplies that remain largely untouched. Waiting has become its own form of labor. It demands patience. It also demands faith. Frederick begins the morning with another gathering of his closest advisors. The atmosphere inside the headquarters is focused but noticeably calmer than during the expedition's first days. Maps remain spread across the large wooden table. Yet today they share space with carefully organized letters received from both Christian communities and the representatives of Sultan Al Kamil. The growing collection of correspondence tells its own story. Each document represents another conversation that ended peacefully. Each sealed reply reflects another opportunity preserved rather than destroyed. The emperor studies them carefully before speaking. He asks whether yesterday's discussions revealed genuine flexibility or merely polite delay. His advisors respond thoughtfully, weighing every observation against previous meetings. One believes progress is accelerating. Another warns that difficult questions still remain unresolved. Neither opinion is dismissed. Both deserve consideration. Modern historians have often remarked that the success of the Sixth Crusade depended not upon one dramatic negotiation, but upon a series of patient exchanges that gradually built confidence. Research discussed by scholars at Princeton University has emphasized that durable agreements usually emerge through repeated communication rather than sudden inspiration, even today. Historians continue debating exactly when both rulers privately concluded that a negotiated settlement had become the preferred outcome. Some believe that realization occurred remarkably early. Others argue it developed only after several cautious meetings demonstrated that compromise remained possible. The surviving evidence supports careful discussion rather than certainty. Outside the headquarters, life continues with quiet purpose. Several carpenters repair damaged supply carts beneath the shade of broad trees. Their tools produce a gentle rhythm of scraping and tapping that blends naturally with bird song drifting across the countryside. Nearby, cooks knead fresh dough while smoke curls lazily upward from stone ovens built only days earlier. The smell is comforting. Fresh bread often is. A young page carries several warm loaves toward the command tent, smiling despite the weight balanced carefully in his arms. Along the path, he pauses to offer one small piece to an elderly guard whose watch has lasted since before sunrise. The old soldier accepts with grateful eyes. No words are needed. Simple kindness often travels quietly through history, far beyond the camp. Another important meeting begins. This time, the conversations move beyond broad intentions toward practical arrangements. Representatives discuss how pilgrims might safely enter Jerusalem. They examine questions concerning administration, security, and respect for sacred places. The discussions require remarkable precision. Every detail matters. A misunderstanding left unresolved today could become tomorrow's crisis. Inside the chamber, voices remain calm even when opinions differ. Occasionally, silence settles over the room while participants reflect before answering. Those pauses no longer feel uncomfortable. They feel productive. Listening has become part of negotiation. One experienced envoy notices that neither delegation seems interested in humiliating the other. That realization quietly changes the atmosphere. If dignity can be preserved on both sides, agreement becomes easier to imagine. Outside, the afternoon sun warms pale stone walls while swallows dart through the bright sky above. A nearby fountain provides cool water, whose steady flow creates a peaceful background to conversations unfolding indoors. You find yourself appreciating the ordinary sounds: flowing water, bird wings, footsteps upon worn stone. History is rarely as loud as later generations imagine. Back at the Crusader camp, rumors begin spreading before any official report arrives. Some soldiers believe Jerusalem will soon be recovered without bloodshed. Others dismiss such optimism as wishful thinking. A veteran knight quietly advises caution. Hope deserves patience, he says to a younger companion. The younger man nods thoughtfully. He has never seen diplomacy accomplish anything this significant. Neither have most people alive. As evening approaches, the returning envoys finally appear upon the distant road. Dust rises gently behind their horses, glowing softly beneath the lowering sun. Guards recognize them long before they reach the camp, and word spreads with remarkable speed. Frederick receives them immediately. The reports are encouraging. Several difficult issues remain unresolved, yet measurable progress has been achieved. Both sides now speak less about whether an agreement is possible and more about what shape that agreement might take. The difference is subtle. It is also profound. The emperor allows himself a brief smile before returning to practical questions. Which points remain unsettled? Which proposals require revision? Where should tomorrow's efforts be concentrated? Success, he knows, often disappears when confidence becomes complacency. Night gradually settles across the hills. Lanterns glow warmly between the tents, while the fragrance of wood smoke drifts through the cooling air. Supper is shared quietly. Laughter appears now and then, softer than before, carried by a growing sense that something extraordinary may truly be unfolding. You stretch beneath your blanket as stars emerge one by one above the peaceful camp. Somewhere beyond the darkness, Jerusalem waits. Its gates remain closed. Its future remains uncertain. Yet with every exchanged letter and every respectful conversation, the impossible begins to feel just a little more within reach. The morning arrives beneath a sky so clear that the distant hills seem almost close enough to touch. Sunlight spreads slowly across the landscape, revealing stone villages, narrow roads, and groves of olive trees that have stood for generations. A gentle breeze carries the scent of dry earth mixed with fresh herbs growing wild along the paths. Nothing appears extraordinary, yet history is about to take an unexpected turn. The negotiations have reached their most delicate stage. For days, careful discussions have narrowed disagreements that once appeared impossible to overcome. Every meeting has replaced another small measure of suspicion with cautious understanding. No one mistakes the process for friendship. It is something different. Mutual necessity. You sense that both rulers understand the cost of failure. Another war would consume lives, wealth, and years that neither side can easily spare. Peace, even an imperfect peace, offers possibilities that victory through battle may never achieve. Frederick spends much of the morning reviewing the latest proposals with remarkable concentration. Maps remain spread across the broad table, although today they serve more as points of reference than military plans. Beside them lie carefully folded letters whose edges have already begun to soften from repeated reading. Every document represents another step. Every revision reflects another compromise. The emperor asks his advisors to challenge every assumption before any decision is finalized. He does not seek agreement simply because it feels desirable. He wants an agreement capable of surviving beyond the excitement of the present moment. That requires patience. It also requires humility. Modern historians have often emphasized that successful diplomacy depends upon accepting imperfect outcomes. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Oxford has noted that the agreement reached during the Sixth Crusade reflected practical compromise, rather than complete victory for either side. Both rulers accepted concessions because both recognized the greater value of stability, even today. Historians continue debating whether either leader truly believed the settlement would endure for many years. Some argue they understood its temporary nature from the beginning. Others believe both hoped it might establish a lasting foundation for peace. The surviving evidence leaves thoughtful room for both interpretations. Outside the headquarters, the camp remains peacefully occupied. A leather worker repairs worn belts beneath a canvas awning while humming quietly to himself. Nearby, several soldiers practice mounting their horses with smooth, practiced movements. Not because battle seems imminent, but because discipline must never disappear. Routine creates confidence. Confidence creates calm. Near the marketplace, children from neighboring villages once again approach the edge of the camp. Their earlier hesitation has softened into curiosity. One little boy watches a falcon perched upon a nobleman's gloved arm with wide eyes. The bird turns its head slowly before lifting into the air with effortless grace. The child laughs. Several nearby soldiers smile without saying anything. Moments like these remind you that peace often begins long before treaties are signed. It begins when fear slowly loses its grip on ordinary people. By midday, another messenger arrives from Al Kamil's representatives. His horse carries the unmistakable signs of a long ride. Sweat darkens its neck despite the moderate weather. Dust clings to both rider and saddle after countless miles beneath the eastern sun. The emperor receives the message immediately. Silence fills the room while the seal is carefully broken. The proposal now before him contains the outline of an agreement unlike any previous crusade has produced. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, several surrounding areas, access for pilgrims, security arrangements, mutual obligations. Each element has been discussed, revised, and discussed again. Frederick studies every line before quietly placing the parchment upon the table. He does not celebrate. He asks questions. His advisors examine each provision carefully, searching for weaknesses that future misunderstandings might exploit. Some suggest minor adjustments. Others recommend accepting the proposal without further delay. Discussion continues well into the afternoon. Outside, the camp remains unaware that history may be changing only a few hundred steps away. The smell of fresh bread drifts through the warm air. Horses graze peacefully beyond the outer tents. Blacksmiths continue their steady work, unaware that their hammers may never need to repair armor damaged during this campaign. The contrast feels remarkable. Great events often unfold while ordinary life continues almost unchanged. As the sun begins descending toward the western horizon, Frederick reaches his decision. He will accept the agreement after several final clarifications. Fresh copies are prepared immediately. Scribes bend over clean parchment with complete concentration. The scratching of quills becomes the only sound inside the chamber. Each sentence is copied with extraordinary care because even the smallest mistake could alter the meaning of the entire document. Wax is warmed. Seals are pressed firmly into place. The finished pages are inspected one final time. Only then are they entrusted to experienced envoys for delivery. You watch the riders depart beneath a sky painted with soft shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretch across the quiet countryside, while birds settle into nearby trees before nightfall. No trumpets accompany their departure. No cheering crowds line the road. History moves almost invisibly. As darkness settles over the camp, conversation remains subdued. Rumors continue spreading, but no official announcement has yet been made. Soldiers share bowls of thick stew beside small fires while wondering what tomorrow may bring. One older pilgrim quietly whispers that perhaps he will finally pray inside Jerusalem after all. He says nothing more. Hope is a fragile companion. You lie beneath your blanket, listening to the gentle crackle of dying embers. Above you, countless stars fill the clear night sky with silent brilliance. Somewhere beyond those dark hills, another ruler now studies the same agreement. If both men choose the same path when morning comes, the crusade will soon accomplish something the medieval world has almost forgotten was possible. A holy city may return without a single great battle. Morning arrives with remarkable stillness. The wind barely stirs the banners standing above the camp. Thin threads of smoke climb almost straight into the pale blue sky before fading into the growing daylight. Somewhere beyond the tents, a donkey brays impatiently while merchants begin arranging baskets of fruit for another ordinary morning. Ordinary mornings have become surprisingly precious. You begin to understand why. History often celebrates dramatic victories, but peace usually arrives so quietly that many people fail to notice it until much later. Today feels like one of those mornings. Frederick rises before sunrise, as he has throughout the campaign. A servant places fresh water beside a small writing table where several rolled documents already wait. The emperor studies them once again, not because he doubts their contents, but because every important decision deserves one final reading before becoming history. Outside, the camp remains calm. No soldiers rush toward defensive positions. No cavalry prepares for immediate movement. Instead, blacksmiths continue repairing wagon fittings. Bakers remove warm loaves from portable ovens. Stable hands brush horses whose greatest challenge today may simply be carrying messengers across peaceful roads. Routine continues. Its familiarity comforts everyone. The final confirmation arrives shortly after the sun clears the eastern hills. A small group of mounted envoys approaches beneath a white banner carried high enough to be recognized from the camp's outer watchposts. Guards observe carefully but without alarm. Within moments, word spreads quietly toward the emperor's headquarters. Frederick receives the visitors with measured courtesy. The formal greetings are respectful. Every movement reflects weeks of growing confidence. The documents exchanged today carry enormous weight. After careful review and final discussion, both sides acknowledge that the negotiated settlement is complete. The agreement does not satisfy every ambition. It was never intended to. Instead, it creates something much rarer, a workable peace. Modern historians generally agree that the treaty represented one of the most unusual diplomatic achievements of the crusading era. Research discussed by scholars at Yale University has emphasized that the agreement temporarily restored Christian access to Jerusalem, while avoiding the devastating military campaign that many contemporaries had expected. Even so, historians continue debating whether the settlement should be viewed primarily as a diplomatic masterpiece or as a temporary compromise made possible by unusual political circumstances. Both interpretations remain influential because the surviving evidence reveals strengths and limitations within the agreement itself. The emperor quietly signs the completed documents. No dramatic speech follows. No grand celebration interrupts the moment. Instead, several scribes immediately begin preparing authenticated copies for distribution to important leaders throughout the region. History often begins with ink drying upon parchment, not with the sound of swords. News travels quickly through the camp. At first, only officers hear the details. Then servants carry whispered conversations toward the kitchens. Merchants overhear passing riders. Stable hands pause their work long enough to exchange surprised glances. Soon, nearly everyone knows, Jerusalem will be entered peacefully. The announcement spreads with remarkable restraint. Perhaps the soldiers expected something louder. Many have spent their entire lives believing that recovering the holy city could happen only through overwhelming force. Instead, the greatest success of their expedition has emerged from patient conversation. Some smile quietly. Others simply sit in thoughtful silence. A gray-haired knight removes his helmet and rests it upon his knee. "I never thought I would see this," he murmurs softly. The younger soldier beside him says nothing. His expression says enough. Throughout the afternoon, preparations begin for the journey toward Jerusalem. Equipment is inspected once again. Although the mood has changed completely, weapons remain close because caution never disappears entirely. Yet, they no longer feel like the center of the expedition. Pilgrims prepare clean clothing. Priests gather sacred books. Merchants quietly discuss the possibility of reopening familiar trading routes. Every group imagines a different future. One elderly woman carefully folds a small piece of embroidered cloth she has carried across the sea. She explains to another pilgrim that she wishes to place it inside one of the holy churches after years of praying that such a journey might become possible. Her hands tremble slightly, not from fear, from anticipation. Nearby, several children from neighboring villages watch the activity with innocent curiosity. They cannot fully understand why so many adults seem relieved instead of triumphant. Perhaps relief is the deeper emotion. Victory often belongs to one side. Relief belongs to everyone spared another war. As evening approaches, Frederick walks beyond the busiest part of the camp, accompanied by only a few trusted companions. The countryside stretches peacefully beneath the soft light of the setting sun. Olive trees cast long shadows across narrow paths, while distant bells from grazing animals echo gently through the valleys. The emperor pauses upon a low ridge overlooking the landscape. He studies the horizon, where Jerusalem lies beyond the hills. You wonder what occupies his thoughts. Perhaps satisfaction, perhaps caution, perhaps the awareness that achieving peace proves only the first step. Preserving it may become the greater challenge. A cool breeze arrives with the coming night. The scent of wild herbs drifts across the fields, while the sky gradually fills with countless stars. Around the camp, supper is served as it has been every evening. Thick soup warms tired travelers. Fresh bread passes from hand to hand. Quiet conversations replace anxious speculation. One pilgrim closes his eyes before eating. He whispers a prayer of gratitude. Another simply watches the stars. No one hurries. Tomorrow promises something that countless people believed impossible only weeks earlier. You settle beneath your blanket, listening to the soft crackling of distant campfires and the gentle breathing of horses resting after another peaceful day. The road ahead leads toward Jerusalem, not through smoke, not through shattered walls, but through an agreement patiently built by two rulers who understood that sometimes the greatest victory belongs to those willing to leave their swords sheathed. Before sunrise, the camp begins to move with quiet purpose. Lanterns sway gently in the cool darkness, while wagons creak forward one careful turn at a time. Horses stamp softly against the packed earth, sending faint clouds of dust into the still morning air. The smell of damp leather mixes with wood smoke lingering from breakfast fires that are already fading into gray ash. Today feels different, not because danger has disappeared, because expectation has changed. The road ahead no longer leads toward a battlefield. It leads toward a city that generations have imagined, mourned, celebrated, and fought over. For many pilgrims traveling with the expedition, this moment has occupied their prayers for years. You fall into step with the slow procession as it leaves the camp behind. The rhythm is unhurried. Hooves strike the road with steady confidence. Wagon wheels roll over scattered stones, polished smooth by countless travelers who passed long before this crusade began. The landscape unfolds quietly. Olive trees stretch across gentle hillsides. Stone farmhouses appear between cultivated fields. Shepherds pause to watch the procession before returning their attention to grazing flocks. Life continues. That simple truth feels increasingly important. Frederick rides near the front of the column without theatrical display. His armor catches the early sunlight, but it lacks the elaborate decoration that might suggest a triumphal parade. His expression remains thoughtful rather than celebratory. He knows the agreement remains fragile. Every mile requires discipline. Every encounter matters. Modern historians have often emphasized that peaceful agreements can collapse more quickly than military victories if either side acts carelessly. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Chicago has highlighted how maintaining mutual confidence after negotiations frequently proves more difficult than reaching the agreement itself. Historians still debate whether Frederick fully appreciated how politically controversial his success would become once news spread throughout Europe. Some believe he anticipated fierce criticism. Others argue he underestimated how many opponents preferred military glory to diplomatic compromise. The surviving correspondence allows thoughtful interpretation without offering complete certainty. As the procession advances, small groups of local residents appear beside the road. Some observe silently, others offer cautious greetings. A merchant lifts a hand in welcome before returning to arrange baskets of dates beneath a shaded stall. Children watch with open curiosity. One little girl hides behind her mother's cloak before slowly peeking around the fabric at the passing riders. A knight notices her hesitation and offers a gentle smile instead of a stern glance. She smiles back, only for a moment. Yet the exchange feels meaningful. Peace often begins with ordinary encounters that never enter official records. By late morning, the distant outline of Jerusalem begins emerging above the surrounding hills. At first, you notice only pale walls rising against the bright sky. Gradually, towers become visible, then gates, then rooftops catching the sunlight like polished stone. Conversation fades. Many travelers simply stare. Some pilgrims quietly wipe tears from their eyes before anyone notices. Others bow their heads in silent prayer. No trumpet announces the first sight of the city. None is needed. For generations, Jerusalem has existed in their minds as both a sacred destination and a symbol beyond easy description. Now it stands before them, real and unmistakable. The column slows naturally, not because the road demands it, because everyone wishes to absorb the moment. A cool breeze drifts across the hillside, carrying faint sounds from within the city. Bells echo softly through the morning air, somewhere inside the walls. Merchants are opening their shops while families prepare ordinary meals. The city is alive, not frozen inside history. That realization surprises many visitors. Jerusalem is not merely a monument, it is home. As the procession approaches the gates, representatives from both sides carry out the carefully arranged procedures agreed upon during the negotiations. Guards stand alert without appearing hostile. Courteous greetings replace suspicious challenges. Every movement reflects weeks of patient preparation. The agreement is no longer words upon parchment. It is becoming lived reality. Frederick pauses briefly before entering. Perhaps he is collecting his thoughts. Perhaps he understands that future generations will remember this moment in dramatically different ways. Some will praise his restraint. Others will question his methods. History rarely speaks with one voice. Inside the walls, narrow streets wind between ancient stone buildings, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Morning sunlight filters through shaded passageways, creating alternating patterns of brightness and cool shadow. The air carries unfamiliar scents. Fresh bread, olive oil, incense drifting gently from places of worship. Spices displayed by merchants whose families have traded here for generations. Pilgrims walk slowly, almost reverently. Many touch the weathered stone walls as though reassuring themselves that the journey has truly ended. One elderly traveler kneels quietly beside a doorway, overcome not by excitement, but by profound relief. His long voyage across sea and land has finally reached its destination. No audience surrounds him. No chronicler records his name. Yet his gratitude becomes part of the larger story. Throughout the day, Frederick continues meeting local officials to ensure the peaceful transition unfolds exactly as agreed. Practical questions still require attention. Security must remain reliable. Pilgrim access must be organized. Daily life inside the city must continue without unnecessary disruption. Diplomacy does not end when documents are signed. It enters its most demanding stage. As afternoon light softens into evening, you walk through streets that feel remarkably calm after everything you expected. Birds settle upon old rooftops. Shopkeepers close wooden shutters one by one. The day's warmth slowly gives way to pleasant evening air. The city breathes. So do you. You realize that the greatest achievement of this crusade may not simply be reaching Jerusalem. It may be reaching it without hearing the roar of a great battle. As darkness settles gently over the ancient city, lanterns begin glowing in windows across the hills. Their warm light reminds you that behind every stone wall lives another family hoping tomorrow will resemble today. Peace, however fragile, gives them that chance. The first morning inside Jerusalem begins with a quiet, unlike anything you expected. It is not the silence of an abandoned city. It is the peaceful rhythm of ordinary life. Continuing after extraordinary events, sunlight slips over ancient rooftops. warming pale limestone that has greeted countless dawns across many centuries. Narrow streets gradually fill with familiar sounds. Wooden shutters open one by one. Bakers carry fresh loaves toward waiting customers. Water splashes into stone basins where travelers wash away the dust of another day. The city awakens. It has done so through many rulers. It continues doing so now. You walk slowly through winding streets, noticing details that armies often overlook. A mason carefully replaces cracked stones along a doorway worn smooth by generations of hands. An elderly merchant arranges small jars of oil with patient precision. Children chase one another across a narrow courtyard until a parent gently calls them home for breakfast. Their laughter lingers. It feels wonderfully ordinary. You realize that peace is often measured not by treaties, but by moments exactly like these. Frederick understands that appearances matter almost as much as official agreements. Every action taken inside Jerusalem will be observed carefully by supporters, critics, and neutral witnesses alike. A single careless decision could provide opponents with arguments lasting for decades. His instructions remain clear. Discipline first, respect always. The soldiers accompanying him receive repeated reminders that they are guests within a city whose fragile balance must not be disturbed. Patrols remain orderly. Markets continue operating. Pilgrims move quietly through the streets without unnecessary displays of triumph. That restraint surprises many observers. Modern historians have frequently noted that maintaining public order after a negotiated settlement required exceptional discipline from both sides. Research discussed by scholars at Stanford University has emphasized that the peaceful transfer of authority depended not only upon diplomacy between rulers, but also upon the careful conduct of ordinary officials and soldiers during the days that followed. Historians still debate whether such calm could have endured much longer without changing political circumstances elsewhere. Some argue the agreement had genuine long-term potential. Others believe its foundations remained too dependent upon the personal authority of the two rulers who negotiated it. The historical record leaves thoughtful room for both conclusions. As the morning continues, Frederick visits several of the city's most important sacred places. His pace is measured rather than ceremonial. There are no roaring crowds pressing forward behind him. No victorious army fills every street. Instead, there is quiet observation. Every step carries symbolic weight. Pilgrims follow respectfully at a distance, many unable to hide their emotion. Some pause to pray silently, others simply stand still, absorbing the reality that they have reached a destination once believed impossible without another devastating war. One elderly woman removes a small cloth from her satchel. You remember seeing her fold it carefully days earlier. Now she places it gently beside a place of prayer before closing her eyes for several long moments. Tears gather, but she does not speak. She has waited years, perhaps decades. No historian records her name. Yet her journey represents thousands of others. Nearby, local craftsmen continue repairing damaged roofs after recent winter rains. They glance occasionally toward passing visitors before returning to their work. Life refuses to pause simply because history has entered the city. That quiet persistence feels reassuring. Jerusalem belongs not only to rulers, it belongs to everyone who wakes here each morning. By midday, Frederick meets with advisors to discuss practical matters that remain unresolved. Pilgrim routes require supervision. Trade regulations must be clarified. Communication with neighboring communities needs careful coordination. The discussions are surprisingly mundane. That is exactly what successful diplomacy eventually becomes. Once the great decisions have been made, countless smaller ones determine whether peace survives. One official presents reports describing respectful behavior throughout the city. Another recommends additional patrols near the gates, not because violence is expected, but because visible order reassures anxious residents. The emperor agrees. Confidence grows slowly. It should never be taken for granted. Outside, the afternoon sun warms the broad stone steps leading toward busy marketplaces. Merchants greet familiar customers while travelers purchase dried fruit, woven baskets, and small keepsakes to carry home. The scent of cinnamon drifts through the warm air. Fresh herbs hang from wooden stalls. A potter carefully shapes wet clay upon a spinning wheel, paying little attention to the political changes unfolding around him. His hands know their craft. History continues beside ordinary work. As evening approaches, Frederick climbs to a quiet terrace overlooking much of the city. From there, rooftops stretch toward the horizon like gentle waves of pale stone touched by golden light. He remains there for several minutes, perhaps longer. You cannot hear his thoughts, but you sense their weight. He has accomplished something generations considered nearly impossible. Yet he also understands that success often creates new challenges. Back in Europe, powerful enemies still oppose him. The Pope has not suddenly become an ally. Many influential voices continue questioning both his authority and his methods. Those conflicts wait beyond the sea. For now, however, Jerusalem rests peacefully beneath the fading daylight. As darkness slowly settles across the city, lamps begin glowing behind windows, one after another. Their gentle light spreads across narrow streets where footsteps gradually become fewer. Evening prayers give way to quiet conversations shared over simple meals. The smell of warm soup drifts from open doorways. Wood smoke rises gently into the cool night air. Somewhere nearby, a father tells his children a familiar bedtime story while tomorrow's bread slowly bakes inside a clay oven. These are the sounds of peace. Fragile, temporary, perhaps, but undeniably real. You pause for one final look across the sleeping city before returning to your lodging. Above, countless stars shine with the same quiet brilliance that watched earlier crusades, earlier kingdoms, and earlier generations. Tonight they watch something different. A city recovered not through a great battle, but through patient negotiation, careful words, and two rulers willing, at least for a time, to choose restraint over conquest. Morning arrives beneath a sky softened by thin clouds drifting slowly from the west. The first light settles gently across Jerusalem's rooftops, turning pale stone into warm shades of gold. Cool air lingers in the narrow streets before the day's warmth gradually replaces it. Shopkeepers lift heavy wooden shutters. Water carriers begin their familiar rounds. Somewhere beyond the city walls, a rooster announces another ordinary day. The city breathes calmly. That calm remains precious. You have now spent several days inside Jerusalem, and its quiet rhythms feel increasingly familiar. The first excitement surrounding the peaceful recovery has settled into something steadier. Pilgrims continue arriving through the gates. Merchants reopen routes that had remained uncertain for years. Families return to routines interrupted by generations of political uncertainty. Yet, beneath that peaceful surface, another reality slowly emerges. Peace signed upon parchment must survive the ambitions of living people. That challenge proves far more difficult. Frederick understands this from the beginning. Every morning, he receives reports from trusted officials describing conditions throughout the city and surrounding countryside. Most bring encouraging news. Pilgrims travel safely. Local markets remain busy. Minor disagreements have been resolved before becoming larger problems. Small successes matter. They build confidence. Confidence encourages cooperation. Still, the emperor never mistakes calm for permanence. History has taught him otherwise. Modern historians frequently observe that medieval political agreements rarely depended solely upon written treaties. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Cambridge has emphasized that personal authority often proved just as important as legal documents. As long as powerful rulers remained committed to an agreement, peace could endure. Once political circumstances changed, even carefully negotiated settlements became vulnerable. Historians still debate whether the treaty could have survived much longer under ideal conditions. Some believe it represented a realistic foundation for lasting coexistence. Others argue that too many competing interests surrounded Jerusalem for any agreement to remain secure indefinitely. The surviving evidence continues to support thoughtful discussion rather than simple certainty. Inside the city, ordinary life offers reasons for cautious optimism. You pass a baker removing fresh loaves from a stone oven. Warm steam rises into the cool morning air, carrying a comforting scent through the narrow street. Customers greet one another with familiar smiles before continuing toward work. Nearby, a carpenter carefully repairs a broken market stall damaged during winter storms. His young apprentice gathers scattered tools while asking questions about measurements and wood grain. Learning continues, work continues, life continues. These simple scenes quietly remind you what diplomacy seeks to protect. Frederick spends much of the afternoon meeting representatives from nearby Christian communities. They speak openly about practical concerns rather than grand ideals. Roads require maintenance. Pilgrim shelters need additional supplies. Wells must remain accessible during the approaching warmer months. The conversations are remarkably ordinary. That ordinariness feels like success. A city preparing for daily needs rather than immediate war has already taken an important step toward stability. One elderly village leader quietly thanks the emperor for allowing farmers to return confidently to their fields. Another explains that merchants have already begun discussing regular trading schedules again. Harvests cannot wait for politics. Neither can families. Those words remain with you long after the meeting ends. Outside, children play beside a small fountain whose water has flowed through the city for generations. Their game changes every few minutes as imagination carries them from one adventure to another. They know little about treaties or diplomacy. They know safety. That is enough. As evening approaches, couriers begin arriving from Europe. Their horses show clear signs of exhausting journeys across mountains and valleys. Dust covers saddles. Leather straps bear the marks of many long days upon difficult roads. The letters they carry feel heavier than their physical weight. News from the West rarely travels alone. It brings politics. It brings expectations. It brings conflict waiting beyond the horizon. Frederick studies each report carefully. Some messages congratulate his remarkable achievement. Others reveal growing criticism from influential voices, unwilling to celebrate a crusade won through negotiation rather than conquest. Certain nobles question whether enough has truly been gained. Some church leaders remain deeply troubled that an excommunicated emperor accomplished what earlier crusading armies could not. The political storm has not disappeared. It has merely remained across the sea. You notice the emperor's expression becoming more thoughtful with every letter. Not discouraged, simply realistic. He has always understood that recovering Jerusalem peacefully would not automatically restore harmony elsewhere. Success often creates new opposition, especially when it challenges long-established expectations. Night gradually settles across the city. A cool breeze slips through narrow streets, carrying the scent of olive wood burning inside household hearths. Lanterns glow behind small windows, while distant conversations soften into peaceful murmurs. Frederick walks briefly along the city walls before retiring for the evening. From there, the surrounding countryside stretches quietly beneath the stars. Villages appear as scattered points of warm light across the dark landscape. Somewhere beyond those distant hills lie rulers who honored their agreement. Far beyond the sea wait rulers who may not. The contrast feels impossible to ignore. You lean against the cool stone, allowing the peaceful silence to settle around you. Crickets sing beyond the walls. A horse shifts gently in a nearby stable. Somewhere below, a family shares its evening meal, unaware that future generations will debate these very days. For now, Jerusalem remains calm. Its streets are filled with footsteps instead of marching armies. Its gates welcome pilgrims instead of preparing for siege. Its nights belong to ordinary people once again. You close your eyes for a quiet moment, appreciating how rare such evenings can be in the long story of medieval history. The treaty has accomplished something extraordinary. Now comes the harder task, allowing peace to survive the ambitions of the world beyond the city's walls. Another sunrise washes softly across the hills surrounding Jerusalem, painting the ancient stone with gentle shades of amber before the stronger light of day takes hold. Cool air lingers in the streets for a little while longer. Shopkeepers sweep dust from their doorways. Bakers stack fresh loaves upon wooden shelves. Water carriers move steadily between public fountains, their familiar footsteps echoing through narrow lanes, polished smooth by centuries of travelers. The city has settled into an unexpected rhythm. Peace has begun to feel almost ordinary. That is both its greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. When calm becomes familiar, people slowly forget how difficult it was to achieve. They begin noticing what remains imperfect instead of remembering what has already been spared. Frederick senses that danger. His work has not ended with the treaty. In many ways, it has only changed shape. Each morning brings another collection of reports from nearby settlements. Pilgrim routes remain open. Markets continue attracting merchants from several regions. Farmers have returned to fields that only months earlier seemed uncertain places to cultivate. The signs are encouraging, yet no experienced ruler mistakes encouraging news for permanent security. A treaty survives only while enough people continue believing it serves their interests. Modern historians have frequently observed that the Sixth Crusade forced contemporaries to reconsider what success in a crusade actually meant. Research discussed by scholars at Harvard University has emphasized that Frederick recovered access to Jerusalem through negotiation rather than decisive military victory, challenging assumptions that had shaped crusading thought for generations. Even today, historians continue debating whether contemporaries judge the expedition more through political loyalty than through its practical achievements. Some chroniclers praised the peaceful recovery of the Holy City. Others focused almost entirely upon Frederick's conflict with the papacy. The surviving accounts reveal remarkably different interpretations of the same events. Those different opinions are already beginning to spread. Letters leave Jerusalem almost daily. Messengers ride toward ports. Ships prepare to carry news across the Mediterranean. By the time those reports reach Europe, they will begin living lives of their own. One noble may read them as proof of remarkable leadership. Another may see compromise where he expected conquest. The facts remain largely the same. Their meanings change with every reader. You walk through one of the city's marketplaces during the middle of the morning. The atmosphere feels busy without becoming hurried. Traders display woven cloth, polished pottery, dried fruit, and carefully measured spices. Customers pause to examine goods while bargaining with practiced smiles. The smell of fresh herbs drifts through the warm air. Olive oil catches the sunlight inside clay jars, somewhere nearby. A craftsman patiently shapes wood into the curved handle of a farming tool. His apprentice watches closely. Learning passes quietly from one generation to another. History is built that way too, not only through famous rulers, but through ordinary people teaching ordinary skills. Near the edge of the market, you notice a group of pilgrims resting beneath the shade of a broad tree. Their boots are worn from months of travel. One man carefully unfolds a rough map whose edges have softened from constant use. They speak softly about returning home. Not everyone expected that possibility. Several had prepared themselves for a campaign measured in years rather than months. One older pilgrim quietly admits that he had feared dying before ever reaching Jerusalem. Instead, he now worries about how to describe this experience to his grandchildren. Will they believe him? A crusade without a great battle. The thought still sounds almost unbelievable. Frederick spends much of the afternoon meeting with local administrators responsible for maintaining order inside the city. Their discussions revolve around practical matters: food supplies, road maintenance, guard rotations, pilgrim accommodations. None of the topics would inspire heroic poems. Every one of them helps preserve peace. The emperor listens carefully before approving several recommendations designed to strengthen cooperation between local communities and newly appointed officials. His approach remains consistent. Stable government begins with dependable routine. Outside the meeting hall, a gentle breeze carries the scent of flowering shrubs growing beside old stone walls. Swallows dart overhead, disappearing beneath roof lines before emerging again into the bright afternoon sky. The beauty feels effortless. History often forgets peaceful afternoons, yet they are the reason diplomacy matters. As evening approaches, another courier arrives from the western Mediterranean. His horse shows clear signs of exhaustion. The man himself appears scarcely less tired. Fresh correspondence is delivered without delay. The letters confirm what Frederick already suspected. His political opponents remain deeply active. Some influential church leaders refuse to recognize the treaty as a worthy crusading achievement. Certain nobles question whether sacred goals can truly be fulfilled through negotiation. Others simply distrust the emperor too deeply to acknowledge any success. Frederick reads the reports quietly. He shows little outward frustration. Perhaps he expected nothing else. Leadership often requires accepting that achievement and criticism arrive together. One trusted advisor suggests issuing a detailed public explanation describing exactly how the treaty protects pilgrims and restores access to Jerusalem. The emperor agrees. Facts deserve careful presentation. Otherwise, rumor quickly fills the empty space. As darkness slowly settles across the city, lanterns begin glowing inside homes scattered along winding streets. Families gather around evening meals. Children grow sleepy after long days filled with games and chores. The smell of lentil soup and fresh bread drifts gently through open windows. These simple scenes remain the strongest argument for peace. No proclamation can equal them. You climb once more to a quiet place overlooking Jerusalem. The city rests beneath a sky crowded with stars. Soft lights shimmer across rooftops while distant voices gradually fade into silence. You think about the generations who marched toward this city believing that only victory in battle could unlock its gates. Now you stand inside those same walls after a campaign remembered for restraint instead of slaughter. The lesson feels profound, not because conflict has disappeared forever. It has not. But because history has revealed another path, however brief, where patience, discipline, and careful words accomplished what countless swords could not. The future remains uncertain. The present, at least for tonight, remains peaceful. The next morning arrives wrapped in a gentle layer of cool air that lingers among Jerusalem's stone streets, before the sun gradually warms the city once again. Light slips across weathered rooftops, revealing familiar scenes that now seem almost comforting. Merchants raise wooden shutters. Donkeys pull small carts toward busy marketplaces. The steady splash of water echoes from public fountains where neighbors greet one another before beginning another day's work. The extraordinary has quietly become ordinary. That may be the greatest success of all. You realize that history often remembers dramatic turning points while overlooking the peaceful days that follow. Yet, those quiet mornings reveal whether a great decision truly succeeded. A city at peace is measured less by speeches than by ordinary routines continuing without fear. Frederick spends the early hours meeting not with generals, but with administrators, local representatives, and experienced officials responsible for keeping everyday life functioning smoothly. They discuss grain supplies arriving from nearby villages. They review the condition of roads used by pilgrims. They examine reports describing activity at city gates, where travelers now pass with increasing confidence. The conversations lack excitement. They possess something better: stability. Modern historians have frequently observed that successful medieval governments depended upon effective administration as much as military strength. Research discussed by scholars at the University of California has emphasized that rulers who maintained reliable institutions often achieved more lasting influence than those remembered only for battlefield victories. Historians still debate whether Frederick viewed these practical responsibilities as equally important as his diplomatic triumph. Some scholars believe administrative order formed the foundation of his entire political philosophy. Others argue that immediate necessity simply demanded careful attention after such an unprecedented agreement. The historical evidence allows thoughtful discussion while resisting simple conclusions. Outside the meeting hall, the marketplace grows steadily busier. Fresh vegetables arrive in woven baskets, balanced carefully upon the backs of patient animals. Potters arrange newly fired bowls, whose smooth surfaces reflect the bright morning light. A tailor measures cloth across a customer's shoulders while offering quiet advice about repairing an old traveling cloak instead of purchasing a new one. The smell of baked bread drifts through the square. So does the fragrance of crushed mint. Children weave happily between adults, carrying baskets far too large for their small shoulders. Life feels wonderfully ordinary. You notice a pilgrim sitting quietly beneath the shade of an ancient tree near one of the city's gathering places. His boots are cracked from months of walking. His hands rest gently upon a wooden staff, polished smooth by constant use. He is in no hurry. For the first time in many months, he does not need to be. Nearby, another traveler carefully sketches part of the city upon a sheet of parchment. The drawing is simple but sincere. He hopes to show his family what he has finally seen with his own eyes. Some journeys become memories before they even end. Frederick continues walking through different parts of Jerusalem during the afternoon, accompanied by only a modest group of attendants. He stops occasionally to observe repairs being made to old walls and public buildings. Craftsmen bow respectfully before returning to their work. The emperor asks practical questions. How long will the repairs require? Are enough building materials available? Has the recent agreement improved the movement of supplies? His curiosity extends beyond politics. He understands that cities survive through countless ordinary efforts performed faithfully every day. One elderly mason wipes dust from his hands before explaining that peaceful roads have already made transporting stone much easier than during earlier years of uncertainty. Frederick listens carefully. Small improvements matter. They become the invisible foundation beneath larger achievements. As the afternoon sunlight softens, groups of pilgrims continue arriving through the city gates. Some kneel immediately upon entering. Others simply stand in silent wonder, allowing their eyes to absorb streets they had imagined since childhood. One young mother gently lifts her little daughter so she can see above the crowd. The child smiles brightly. She does not understand centuries of history. She understands that her mother is happy. Sometimes that is enough. The peaceful movement of travelers through the city offers powerful evidence that the treaty is functioning as intended. Roads remain open. Markets remain active. Daily life continues without the constant shadow of immediate conflict. Yet Frederick never allows optimism to become carelessness. Late in the day, trusted couriers arrive carrying fresh reports from Europe. Political disagreements continue unfolding beyond the Mediterranean. Several influential leaders remain openly hostile toward the emperor despite his remarkable achievement. The news surprises no one, especially not Frederick. Leadership often means solving one problem while another quietly waits beyond the horizon. He reads each letter with calm concentration before setting it aside. There will be time to face those challenges. For now, Jerusalem deserves careful stewardship. Evening slowly settles across the city. The heat of the afternoon fades into pleasant coolness. Swallows disappear beneath tiled roofs, while the first evening lamps begin glowing behind narrow windows. The scent of wood smoke drifts gently through winding streets, where footsteps gradually become fewer. Families gather around simple meals. Neighbors exchange quiet greetings before closing their doors. A baker sweeps flour from his floor before preparing tomorrow's dough. These peaceful rituals repeat themselves across the city. They rarely appear in chronicles. Yet they are the true reward of successful diplomacy. You climb once more to a place overlooking the rooftops. The setting sun paints the limestone walls with warm shades of amber before slowly surrendering to twilight. Beyond the city, rolling hills stretch peacefully toward the distant horizon, where roads disappear into fading light. You think back to the crowded harbor where this journey began. The damp ropes, the restless horses, the uncertainty surrounding an excommunicated emperor preparing to sail. So much has changed, and yet the greatest accomplishment cannot be measured by territory alone. It can be measured by quiet evenings like this one, when families sleep safely beneath familiar roofs, pilgrims rest after long journeys, and a city once expected to echo with battle instead settles peacefully beneath the stars. For tonight, at least, Jerusalem belongs not to war. It belongs to ordinary life. The morning begins beneath a veil of pale clouds that soften the sunlight before it reaches the city. A cool breeze wanders through Jerusalem's narrow streets, carrying the scent of damp stone left behind by the night's gentle dew. The city awakens slowly. A baker slides fresh loaves onto wooden shelves. A water carrier balances two heavy buckets with practiced ease. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, doves flutter into the brightening sky before settling once again upon ancient walls. Everything feels wonderfully familiar. Perhaps that is the quiet miracle. Peace has survived another night. You walk through streets that no longer seem tense with expectation. Pilgrims greet local merchants with growing confidence. Craftsmen leave their workshops open while neighbors stop to exchange ordinary conversations about weather, harvests, and family news. The subjects are beautifully unremarkable. They are exactly what peaceful cities deserve. Frederick begins his day reviewing reports collected over the previous week. His advisors gather around the broad table where maps now compete for space with administrative records rather than military plans. Grain supplies remain steady. Pilgrim traffic continues increasing. Roads leading toward the coast remain secure. Each report adds another small measure of reassurance. The emperor listens carefully before asking whether any isolated disputes have appeared between local communities. His officials mention only minor disagreements over property boundaries and market regulations. Nothing unexpected, nothing alarming. The calm feels earned rather than accidental. Modern historians have frequently emphasized that the true significance of the Sixth Crusade cannot be measured solely by the treaty itself, but also by the period of relative stability that followed. Research discussed by scholars at Columbia University has highlighted that the peaceful transfer of Jerusalem briefly demonstrated that negotiation could accomplish objectives previously associated almost exclusively with military conquest. Historians still debate how revolutionary contemporaries considered this achievement. Some argue that many people immediately recognized its extraordinary character. Others believe political rivalries prevented large parts of Europe from appreciating what had actually been accomplished. The surviving chronicles reveal admiration in some regions and deep suspicion in others. Those different reactions are becoming increasingly visible. Letters continue arriving from Europe. Some praise Frederick's judgment. Others criticize his methods with equal determination. One messenger delivers correspondence from a noble who describes the peaceful recovery of Jerusalem as evidence that wisdom may sometimes defeat force. Another letter insists that only battlefield victory can produce lasting honor. The emperor reads both with equal attention. He has learned that leadership requires listening even to uncomfortable opinions. Outside the headquarters, the marketplace grows lively beneath the warming sun. A silversmith carefully polishes small cups until they reflect the light like still water. Nearby, a farmer unloads baskets of ripe figs while customers gather around his cart. The sweet fragrance fills the air. A little farther along, an elderly woman patiently teaches her granddaughter how to weave narrow strips of wool into decorative patterns. The child struggles, then succeeds. Both smile. Simple lessons continue despite the weight of history surrounding them. You pause beside a stone fountain where cool water flows continuously into a shallow basin worn smooth by countless hands. Travelers refill leather flasks before continuing toward the holy places scattered throughout the city. One pilgrim quietly remarks that he had expected fear. Instead, he has found calm. His companion nods thoughtfully. Neither says anything more. Some experiences resist easy description. During the afternoon, Frederick welcomes several local religious and civic leaders. Their meeting concerns practical cooperation rather than ceremony. They discuss maintaining roads, protecting pilgrims, resolving disputes peacefully, and ensuring that daily commerce continues without unnecessary interruption. The conversation is respectful. Occasionally, opinions differ. Yet, disagreement no longer feels dangerous. That may be the greatest change of all. The Emperor encourages every participant to speak openly before decisions are reached. He understands that lasting stability depends upon trust built through repeated cooperation. Outside, sunlight gradually softens into the rich golden colors of late afternoon. Long shadows stretch across courtyards where children continue their games without paying attention to political discussions taking place nearby. A ball rolls across worn stone. Laughter follows. History quietly steps aside. As evening approaches, Frederick walks once more along the city walls. From this height, the surrounding countryside appears peaceful beneath the fading light. Olive groves ripple gently in the breeze, while distant villages begin lighting evening fires whose smoke rises almost perfectly straight into the calm sky. He remains silent for several minutes. You wonder whether he is thinking about the difficult voyage that brought him here, or the equally difficult return awaiting him. His greatest political battles may still lie ahead. The Pope remains hostile. Powerful princes continue questioning his authority. Many critics refuse to separate his diplomatic achievement from their broader opposition to his rule. The Emperor surely knows this. Even remarkable success cannot erase long-standing rivalries. Night slowly settles across Jerusalem. Lanterns glow warmly inside homes where families gather for simple evening meals. The aroma of lentil stew, roasted onions, and fresh bread drifts through the cool air. A craftsman closes his workshop after finishing one final repair. Nearby, a shepherd guides a small flock through the city gate before darkness fully arrives. Ordinary life continues. That simple truth feels more meaningful with each passing day. You stand quietly beneath the clear night sky, listening to distant footsteps fade into peaceful silence. The stars shine above Jerusalem exactly as they did before kings, before crusades, before empires rose and fell. They remind you of something important. Political victories may be temporary. Stone walls may change hands. Even treaties may one day end. But every peaceful evening grants ordinary people another chance to live, work, worship, and dream without hearing the sound of war outside their doors. Perhaps that is the legacy worth remembering most. A cool breeze greets the city before sunrise. Slipping quietly through narrow streets and across open courtyards where yesterday's warmth still lingers within the ancient stone. The eastern sky slowly brightens, from deep blue to pale gold. And one by one, the familiar sounds of another peaceful morning return. A baker opens his heavy wooden door. A water carrier balances full buckets across strong shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey shakes its harness before beginning another day's work. The city wakes without fear. That simple fact remains extraordinary. Only weeks ago, many believed another campaign would end with shattered walls, smoke rising above rooftops, and years of rebuilding. Instead, Jerusalem greets the dawn, with merchants preparing stalls rather than soldiers preparing assaults. Peace has changed the rhythm of the city. You notice it in countless small ways. A tailor carefully measures a customer's cloak without glancing nervously toward the gates. A family spreads woven rugs outside their home to catch the gentle morning sun. Children chase one another through a small square until an elderly neighbor laughs and tells them not to run so fast across the worn stone pavement. No one hurries. No one expects battle before sunset. That quiet confidence feels almost fragile. like the first leaves appearing after a long winter. It has taken patience to grow. It will require even greater patience to preserve. Frederick begins another day with meetings that would have seemed almost unimaginable when the expedition first sailed from Italy. Instead of discussing siege engines or cavalry formations, he reviews reports concerning pilgrim accommodations, trade routes, and local administration. The lists are remarkably ordinary: food supplies, road repairs, market security, tax collection, questions that rarely inspire epic songs. Yet, these practical concerns determine whether peace becomes a lasting reality or merely a brief interruption between wars. Modern historians frequently observe that the most successful medieval rulers balanced military strength with effective government. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Pennsylvania has emphasized that stable administration often outlasted dramatic battlefield victories because it shaped everyday life long after armies departed. Historians still debate whether Frederick's greatest strength lay in his diplomacy or in his administrative abilities. Some argue his political vision made negotiation possible. Others believe his disciplined approach to governing allowed agreements to function once they had been reached. The historical evidence continues encouraging careful discussion rather than simple conclusions. Late in the morning, a group of pilgrims prepares to begin the journey home. Their faces reveal mixed emotions: joy, relief, a quiet reluctance to leave a place they feared they might never see. One elderly man kneels briefly before departing through the city gate. He carries no valuable treasure, only a small wooden cross carefully wrapped inside a linen cloth. For him, that simple object now holds memories far beyond its material worth. His granddaughter will one day ask about this journey. He will tell her that he reached Jerusalem without marching through the smoke of battle. Perhaps she will find the story difficult to believe. Nearby, merchants discuss expanding trade with neighboring towns now that travel feels more secure. A spice dealer carefully counts small bags filled with cinnamon and pepper while negotiating future deliveries. Across the street, a potter stacks newly fired bowls upon wooden shelves, confident that customers will continue arriving. Commerce rewards stability. So do families. So do travelers. The afternoon brings another meeting between Frederick and several local leaders responsible for maintaining order in the surrounding countryside. Their conversation focuses on practical cooperation after the emperor eventually departs. That subject cannot be avoided forever. Everyone understands the treaty must continue functioning, even after its architects return to their own responsibilities. Frederick listens carefully before encouraging continued communication between communities. Small misunderstandings, he reminds them, should never be allowed to grow into larger conflicts. The advice feels simple. History proves it rarely is. Outside the meeting hall, the warm afternoon breeze carries the scent of flowering herbs growing beside ancient walls. Bees move patiently from blossom to blossom, while swallows circle high above the rooftops. A stonemason pauses to wipe dust from his forehead before returning to repair a weathered staircase. The staircase has served generations. With care, it may serve generations more. You find yourself thinking that peace resembles such careful repair. It does not create an entirely new world overnight. Instead, it strengthens what already exists, replacing damaged stones one at a time until people can once again walk safely. As evening approaches, Frederick rides beyond the city walls accompanied by only a small escort. The surrounding hills glow beneath the soft amber light of the setting sun. Vineyards stretch across gentle slopes. Olive trees cast long shadows over narrow paths winding toward distant villages. He reins in his horse upon a quiet rise overlooking Jerusalem. The city appears calm, beautiful, enduring. You wonder whether he realizes that later generations will continue arguing over these very days. Some will call him one of the most remarkable rulers of the Middle Ages. Others will remain deeply critical of his conflicts with the papacy and his uncompromising personality. History rarely grants unanimous verdicts. It rarely should. As darkness settles across the landscape, scattered lights begin appearing inside homes throughout the valleys below. Families gather around evening meals. Shepherds secure their flocks. Travelers search for welcoming inns before the roads disappear into night. Jerusalem glows gently beneath the stars, not as a prize freshly conquered, but as a living city enjoying a rare season of quiet. You remain there for several moments, breathing the cool evening air while the last colors fade from the western sky. The treaty cannot promise forever. No agreement ever can. Yet it has accomplished something generations believed impossible. It has shown that even after decades of conflict, determined leaders willing to choose conversation over pride can briefly alter the course of history. For tonight, that possibility is enough. The morning opens beneath a sky brushed with thin silver clouds that soften the first light before it reaches Jerusalem's ancient walls. The city stirs gradually, almost reluctantly, as though reluctant to disturb the precious calm that has settled over its streets. A baker opens his oven door, releasing the comforting aroma of warm bread. A pair of pigeons flutter from one rooftop to another. Somewhere nearby, a wooden cart rattles gently over smooth stone, carrying baskets of vegetables toward the morning market. The sounds are familiar now. They feel almost like home. That realization surprises you. Only weeks ago, every conversation revolved around uncertainty, political rivalry, and the possibility of another devastating campaign. Now your attention is drawn towards simpler things. The laughter of children chasing one another through a courtyard. The patient rhythm of a broom sweeping dust from a doorstep. The quiet exchange between neighbors greeting one another before beginning another day's work. Peace changes what people notice. That may be its greatest gift. Frederick understands that his time in Jerusalem is slowly drawing to a close. Remaining indefinitely has never been part of his plan. His empire waits across the sea, and the political storms gathering there cannot be ignored forever. Even remarkable success cannot suspend ordinary responsibilities. The emperor spends the morning reviewing arrangements for his eventual departure. Trusted officials present detailed reports concerning the city's administration after he leaves. Roads remain open. Pilgrim traffic continues steadily. Trade has begun recovering along routes that only months earlier carried far fewer travelers. The reports are encouraging, yet Frederick studies them carefully. He knows that lasting stability depends upon consistent attention long after celebrations have faded. Modern historians have frequently emphasized that the emperor's greatest challenge began almost immediately after securing the treaty. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Oxford has noted that diplomatic achievements often prove most vulnerable during the transition from negotiation to long-term implementation, when political circumstances continue evolving beyond the original agreement. Historians still debate whether Frederick could realistically have done more to strengthen the settlement before returning west. Some believe the treaty had reached the practical limits allowed by contemporary politics. Others suggest that additional time in the region might have reinforced local cooperation. The surviving evidence offers no simple answer, reminding you that history often presents difficult choices rather than perfect solutions. Outside the headquarters, the marketplace hums with quiet energy. A merchant carefully weighs dried figs upon a brass scale. Nearby, a cooper tightens iron bands around a newly finished barrel, while his apprentice watches every movement with careful attention. Across the square, an elderly woman selects herbs one stem at a time before wrapping them inside a woven basket. The scent of rosemary mingles with fresh bread. The combination feels wonderfully ordinary. You pause beside a fountain where clear water flows continuously into a stone basin polished smooth by countless hands. Pilgrims refill leather flasks before continuing toward the sacred places they have traveled so far to reach. One young traveler closes his eyes after drinking. The water is cool. Simple comforts often become unforgettable during long journeys. As afternoon sunlight brightens the city, Frederick receives several respected local leaders for what may become one of their final formal meetings. The conversation carries a different tone today. Practical matters remain important, but reflection quietly enters the discussion. They speak about responsibility, about trust, about the fragile nature of peace. One elder observes that treaties may be written by rulers, but they survive only when ordinary people choose cooperation over resentment in their daily lives. The room grows thoughtfully quiet. The emperor nods slowly. No lengthy reply is necessary. Outside, craftsmen continue repairing sections of an old public building whose weathered stones have endured centuries of changing governments. One mason carefully removes a cracked block before lowering a stronger replacement into place. The work demands patience. No single stone restores the wall. Together, they make it strong again. The image lingers in your mind. Peace resembles that wall. Each agreement, each respectful conversation, each ordinary act of trust. Together, they create something durable enough for families to build their lives upon. Later in the afternoon, Frederick rides through Jerusalem one more time without ceremony. His escort remains modest. There are no triumphal banners or grand processions. Instead, he quietly observes the city that has become the center of one of medieval history's most remarkable diplomatic achievements. Shopkeepers recognize him. Some bow respectfully. Others simply continue serving customers. Life has resumed its natural rhythm. Perhaps that is the finest compliment any ruler could hope to receive. As evening approaches, the emperor climbs to a familiar viewpoint overlooking the surrounding hills. The western sky glows with warm shades of amber and rose while long shadows stretch across vineyards and olive groves beyond the walls. A cool breeze brushes gently across your face. The scent of wood smoke rises from scattered villages preparing evening meals. Sheep bells echo faintly across the valleys. Everything feels peaceful. Yet Frederick knows that peace never exists in isolation. Across the Mediterranean, political rivals continue gathering strength. His disagreements with Pope Gregory IX remain unresolved. Many European princes still measure his success through the lens of old conflicts rather than recent achievements. The road home will not be easy. Perhaps it never was. Night gradually settles over Jerusalem. One by one, lamps begin glowing behind narrow windows. Families gather around simple suppers. Children grow sleepy after another ordinary day inside a city that only recently stood at the center of extraordinary negotiations. You remain quietly upon the hillside, watching the lights appear across the ancient landscape. History will remember kings and treaties. You will remember something else: the smell of warm bread, the sound of flowing water, the laughter returning to streets once expected to echo with war. Sometimes the deepest victories arrive without the noise of conquest. They arrive almost quietly enough to be mistaken for an ordinary evening. Morning arrives with a quiet dignity that seems to belong only to places where history has settled layer upon layer across the centuries. The first sunlight touches Jerusalem's walls, turning cool gray stone into warm shades of honey and gold. A gentle breeze moves through the city, carrying the scent of fresh bread, olive wood smoke, and flowering herbs from small gardens hidden behind weathered courtyards. The city awakens peacefully. That remains its greatest achievement. You stand for a final moment, overlooking streets that only weeks earlier seemed destined to witness another brutal campaign. Instead, merchants unlock their shops. Pilgrims begin another day of prayer. Children hurry after one another through narrow lanes, their laughter echoing gently between buildings that have endured far more conflict than they can yet imagine. Ordinary life has returned. History rarely offers a greater reward. Frederick prepares for the journey back toward Europe. Horses are saddled before the morning grows warm. Wagons carrying documents, supplies, and personal belongings are inspected one final time. Experienced officers quietly review travel plans while ensuring that every arrangement made during the treaty remains clearly understood by those who will remain behind. Nothing feels hurried. Important departures seldom do. The emperor walks through part of the city without ceremony. There are no grand speeches announcing victory. No triumphant parade fills the streets. Instead, he pauses occasionally to observe familiar places that have become symbols of an achievement unlike any other crusade. He watches merchants greeting returning customers. He notices craftsmen repairing old buildings. He sees pilgrims arriving with hopeful expressions rather than fearful ones. These quiet scenes speak more powerfully than any proclamation. Modern historians generally agree that the Sixth Crusade occupies a unique place in medieval history because it demonstrated that diplomacy could temporarily accomplish what repeated military expeditions had struggled to secure. Research discussed by scholars at Yale University has emphasized that Frederick's negotiations fundamentally challenged contemporary assumptions about how crusading objectives might be achieved. Historians still debate the broader legacy of the expedition. Some argue it revealed a practical alternative to prolonged warfare. Others believe the treaty succeeded only because of an exceptionally rare political moment that could not easily be repeated. Both perspectives continue enriching historical scholarship, reminding you that the past often resists simple conclusions. As the morning progresses, pilgrims continue entering Jerusalem through the city gates. One elderly couple pauses immediately after crossing the threshold. Neither speaks. They simply stand together. Their long journey has ended peacefully. Nearby, a young merchant carefully arranges folded cloth outside his shop while greeting familiar neighbors with relaxed confidence. A potter carries newly fired bowls toward the marketplace. Farmers arrive with carts filled with fresh vegetables harvested from nearby fields. The harvest continues. So does life. Peace allows ordinary people to think about tomorrow instead of merely surviving today. That truth quietly follows you through every street. Before departing, Frederick meets one final time with trusted officials responsible for preserving the agreement. Their conversation is practical, thoughtful, and free from unnecessary ceremony. Roads must remain secure. Pilgrims must continue traveling safely. Disagreements should be resolved quickly before distrust can grow. The emperor offers careful encouragement rather than dramatic commands. He understands something experience has taught him well. No ruler governs forever. Strong institutions and mutual respect outlast individuals. The meeting ends with simple expressions of gratitude. Outside, sunlight brightens the surrounding hills while birds circle effortlessly above the ancient city. A cool breeze carries the distant sound of sheep bells from nearby valleys. Nature continues its patient rhythm. Indifferent to politics, yet quietly embracing every generation that passes beneath its skies. The procession finally begins moving toward the western roads. You glance back one last time. Jerusalem stands quietly upon its hills, not as a city conquered through overwhelming force, but as a place briefly reclaimed through restraint, calculation, patience, and dialogue. The image remains with you. It will remain for centuries, as the miles slowly pass beneath steady hoofbeats. Your thoughts drift across everything you have witnessed. You remember the crowded harbor where uncertainty surrounded an excommunicated emperor preparing to sail. You remember anxious soldiers expecting battle, cautious envoys carrying carefully chosen words, long evenings illuminated by candlelight while treaties took shape one sentence at a time. You remember peaceful streets instead of shattered gates. You remember children laughing. You remember fresh bread baking while diplomacy quietly reshaped history. The Sixth Crusade never erased the conflicts of the medieval world. Its treaty would eventually weaken as political circumstances changed and new struggles emerged. Later generations would once again contest Jerusalem, and the fragile balance achieved through negotiation would not endure forever. Yet its importance cannot be measured only by its duration. It proved that history sometimes turns because two determined leaders recognize that another battlefield offers only another generation of grief. It reminded the medieval world that courage appears in many forms. Sometimes courage rides into battle. Sometimes it sits patiently across a negotiating table. Sometimes it chooses conversation when pride demands conflict. As evening approaches on the road home, the setting sun paints the landscape with gentle shades of amber. The cool air carries the scent of distant campfires while the first stars begin appearing overhead. You breathe deeply. The journey feels complete, not because every problem has been solved. History never grants such endings, but because you have witnessed one remarkable chapter in which wisdom briefly prevailed over violence, leaving behind a legacy that continues inviting reflection centuries later. May that quiet lesson travel with you long after this story comes to rest. As our journey through the remarkable story of the Sixth Crusade comes to a peaceful close, take a quiet moment to reflect on the part of this history that stayed with you the most. Was it the courage to negotiate when others expected war? The ordinary lives protected by a fragile peace? Or the unforgettable sight of Jerusalem entered without a great battle? I would truly love to hear your thoughts. So leave a comment sharing the moment that touched you most or the lesson you will remember. If you enjoyed spending this peaceful evening exploring history together, there are many more journeys waiting for you on this channel, each filled with remarkable people, forgotten worlds, and stories that unfold at a calm and gentle pace. Thank you for allowing me to accompany you tonight. Until our next adventure through history, may your evening be peaceful, your rest be deep, and your curiosity continue to grow. Blessings to you and your family.